ボッスンこと藤崎祐介だ。
鬼塚姫子や。
スイッチこと臼井和義。スケットダンス。
And so the day has finally come. After so many delays and after months and months of trying to get ready for this discussion, we are finally going to talk about one of my favorite comics of all time, Kenta Shinohara's Sket Dance. Sid, are you excited?
Yeah, I'm excited. I really... do you want to know what my thoughts on this comic were, Colton?
Yeah, Sid, I would love to hear what your thoughts were. What did you think of Sket Dance, my favorite series of all time?
I loved it! See what I did there? Remember back in the previous time we discussed it, I said I hate it, but it was like a fake out. Well, this time I just said, honestly, I liked it. So
man. Oh, Sid, that was so
There's
funny.
There's the callback.
Oh, man, Sid, man, good thing you loved it. Otherwise, I would have had to kill you, Sid. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am so excited to talk about Sket Dance today. Like I've said it multiple times. I'm going to say it again. It is definitely one of my favorite manga of all time. I constantly go on about my favorite series on here. And as far as where I would have to rank this personally, it would probably be like number 4 for me. Number 3 being Nero, number 2 being Ice Shield, and then number 1 being One Piece. So it's definitely in my top 5. Sket Dance just means that much to me. And thankfully, we're going to have about 2 hours to talk about why. So Sid, I know what Sket Dance is about, but for our audience, why don't you tell us what Sket Dance is about?
Sket Dance is about a team of 3 high schoolers who formed this group called the Sket Dance, which is dedicated to helping students around the school with whatever problems they have. So they're sort of like the Yorizuna, except, they help students, and the problems are usually more related to like what, kids would deal with, even though they do deal with some really wacky problems a lot of the time as well. SCAT stands for support, kindness. What does the E stand for again?
Encouragement, I think.
Encouragement, and T is troubleshoot. So, yeah, it's an acronym for those things. They explain, like, where it also came from later on, but I forget, like, the full context of that explanation.
Yeah, it's a bit of Japanese wordplay that, I'll be honest, I don't really fully understand because I don't speak enough of the language to fully comprehend that kind of thing, because the Japanese really like their puns.
Yeah, so the main street characters include the leader, Bossoon, as he's nicknamed, also known as Yusuke Fujimaki, and he is kind of like a wimpy guy, but when it counts, like, he will always stand up for his friends, and he's a huge pillar of support and encouragement to everyone around him, and he has a special power where when he can put on his goggles, he can concentrate really hard and figure out any problem. So that's his main character power, and they make a joke about how lame it is in the first chapter.
But wait, Sid, he also has a slingshot because no other character in the history of Jump has ever had a slingshot before.
Yeah, he has a slingshot, and he's pretty good with it. He has good aim. He and Usopp would be a good pair as snipers to have on your party, I think. If you were, like, in a dungeon or something. I don't know.
Man, Shueisha's really missing out on that Sket Dance crossover with One Piece money. I mean, come on, guys. Think of the possibilities.
I know, they should have done it back when it was running. Alongside Bossoon is Himeko, real name Onizuka Hime, which is still pretty much a pretty punny name, but she is the only female member of the Sket Dance, and she's the strongest member. She flings around a hockey stick. I forget what the original one was called, but then the second one was called Flagrance, I think.
I think the first one was called the Cyclone?
Yes, the Cyclone. So the first one she had was Cyclone, and then she got Flagrance later on. So she is probably the dumbest member. Like, she's not the smartest at the beginning, but she, like, eventually works real hard in school later on. She likes Bassoon, but she doesn't, like, really come to realize it and then, like, admit it until, like, midway into the manga. A little before then, you know. But, she has a lot going on. And then there's also Switch, who is probably the most interesting character in the entire manga, and the best. Because at first he's like, you think he's just kind of like a gimmick type character, because he is a stoic, very silent guy who only talks through his computer. He doesn't speak at all like himself. He talks through his computer, which he types out everything he says, and it has like a automated voice, like repeat everything he's typing. And then he's the smartest member of the Sket Dance. He's like a real genius. He's a super otaku as well. And he's also the straight man a lot of the time. Well, all the Sket Dance kind of switch around being straight man depending on the situation. So sometimes he can be the weirdest character, and then sometimes he can be the most sensible and like stressed out character at all the weirdness. But what is really interesting about all three of these characters is that the reason they are who they are and like everything about them is informed by their backstories, which are really complex and deeply moving emotionally. And Switch is possibly like the most tragic, and his arc is the most like emotionally fulfilling, like as it develops throughout the story, to the point where the climax of the manga does hinge a lot upon his development. It hinges upon all three of their development, but like the big payoff comes in through like his character development throughout the entire manga, and like finally being able to like spoiler speak again.
Oh yeah, I could go on about how much, what I'm afraid of about this discussion is it's just gonna be 2 hours of just me going, guys, this thing is really good. I can't explain why, but oh my god, this thing is so good. But man, you guys just don't understand. It's so good. And it's just gonna be just me on loop for 2.5 hours just going, but I'll try to do my best to actually, be a little more nuanced than that. But to your point about Switch, I personally feel like he's mostly in that role of like, he's the weird character that everybody comments on how weird he is. He kind of plays mostly that role, but he does every once in a while play the straight man, just not as often as the other two though.
He's the weirdest, but he's also the most self-aware. So when there are situations that are so crazy that even he will not participate in them, like he becomes like straight man in that situation. But again, it's like a rotating cycle. Like no one is like the designated like Tsukomi in this series. Like everyone like switches around in that role. So like where in Gintama, like Shinpachi is like the designated straight man. Like in Sket Dance, it's really going to depend on the situation, because everyone can get into their own brand of craziness. And then another character will be like, what is going on? What is this weirdness?
I would personally say it's mostly Himiko.
Yeah, and they do joke about that during the crossover with Gintama. They say that Himiko and Shinpachi have that kind of role. But even like Himiko, I feel, there are times where like she is acting bizarre, and either Switch or Bassoon are like, what are you doing?
Like, hey, stop stepping on my toes.
Yeah, so and there's not like a time in Gintama, or at least it's not very regular, where like Shinpachi is gonna do something crazy and then Gintoki and Kagura are gonna be like, that.
Yeah, that's mostly pretty rare, I would say. Aside from his idle shenanigans, it's mostly pretty rare.
Yeah.
But also to Switch's point, one of my favorite jokes in the series is where is the chapter where where the self-insert for Kenta Shinohara comes by to stop by the club to get more research about a manga he's creating, and he comments on how interesting Switch is, and I think at some point they joke about how like Switch is so interesting that he should be the main character and not Boss-soon. I mean, they also say that about Himeko, but like that's kind of the joke is, wow, what are these two characters doing here? Like either of them could be the main character. Why is Boss-soon the main character? He's actually really lame.
Well, the reason Boss-soon is the main character and why I think it was great that he was the main character is that Boss-soon has the most heart and embodies what Sket Dance represents most out of anyone. And like he's the one who like picks up Himeko and Switch out of bad places in their life and helps them to move forward throughout the course of the series. So I feel that Boss-soon earns that main character status for like the relationship he has with the people around him. Like people gravitate towards him and their lives are improved thanks to like him being there as a pillar of support. And it's kind of like how that similar kind of thing can be said for main characters in other Jump manga. Like you could say that for Gintoki and Gintama a little bit. I mean, people, I don't know if he really like actively helps people. I mean, he does. He's not always altruistic about it though, but you can say that about Gintoki, you can say that about like Luffy in One Piece, Goku in Dragon Ball. So I think that's why Boss-soon is like effective as a main character, is that he brings out the best in the people around him and he draws people together. So what great about that with Switch is that like he is allowed to be a supporting role, and so he's allowed to be allowed to do different kinds of roles depending on the story they're telling, but they also like emphasize how Switch is developing when it gets serious through like how Boss-soon is like reacting to it. Because in the beginning of the manga, we are dropped in like the Sket Dance has already been a thing for a while, and over the course of the manga, we learn more about the backstory of each individual character, and then eventually how they all came together to form Sket Dance. So there's a lot of mysteries throughout the entire story of like how they all met and then how they got from point A to point B. And Switch in particular, there's a huge question towards that, because in his first backstory arc, like we see what made him become Switch, but then we don't see like how he joined the Sket Dance, and it takes like 4 years of serialization worth of chapters before we get to that point. So there's a lot of development in between that first backstory arc for Switch and that second one, in which we see like how he behaves in present day and then what his issues are and in working through that. And then by the time we get to that second backstory arc, like everything like clicks into like, okay, this is why Boss-soon and Himiko are so important to Switch, but Boss-soon in particular, like what they did to get him out of that bad place in his life.
Yeah, I mean, at least up until then, like, you know, there is some good, like, foreshadowing, so sort of hinting towards basically the latter half of Switch's backstory. The one scene that kind of comes to mind, or I guess the one kind of arc that comes to mind in particular is the Christmas card arc. Yeah, where I forget her name, but somebody comes up to the Sket Dan to basically try to convince them to help their friend come out of their home because they're basically a shut-in, and that obviously really resonates deeply within Switch, and he's the one to beg Boss-soon to basically, you know, help them out, because obviously he's been in that situation before, and he understands where this person is coming from, and that particular moment in particular always makes me tear up, because it's like I understand the context of that now in retrospect.
Yeah, that was a good storyline. There's a lot of great Switch moments, like, that kind of explore, like, what his problems are, and then when you get to that, like, second backstory, you're like, oh, wow. So it's, like, really moving when you read that, you know, Christmas storyline, and then you go, and you think back to a lot of what Switch does in the series when you read that backstory and then you think about, like, all the context behind his actions in the series, and, like, everything is, like, wow. So, like, Switch is, like, a great example of how to make, like, a character who's, like, on the surface just really interesting and funny, but, like, when you delve deeper in him, like, you feel, like, such sympathy for, like, how tragic a character he really is. And he's still funny, but, like, there's also a lot of sadness to him that, like, is still present, like, throughout the manga, but eventually he overcomes it.
Yeah, I want more characters in manga like this, where you have a character with a really, like, funny, interesting gimmick, and then little do you know, there is a very tragic reason behind that gimmick, and as soon as you learn about, you know, why it's tragic, you kind of have a hard time looking at that character the same way again. I think they even kind of pulled that sort of thing in Toriko. I forget the character's name, though. Yuda. I think his name was Yuda.
Yeah.
It's something I hope to see more of, because I find those kinds of characters really interesting. But yeah, Switch is definitely probably the best character in the entire series, honestly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Next to Basun.
So you think Basun is the best, or Switch is the best?
Yeah, I probably worded that. I worded that. Well, I think they're probably both equally the best, because I love Switch as a character, and I'm totally invested in his struggles all the way from the beginning to the end. But I also sort of kind of relate to Basun, so in that sense, like, I view them both as equally like my favorite characters.
I definitely think they're the best characters in terms of their character arcs. Switch is probably who I'd choose if I had to choose between them as the best in terms of his character arc. But Basun's incredibly compelling as well, which you probably don't expect from the beginning, because he seems pretty straightforward, but, like, when you learn his backstory, that also gives a lot of context to him, and he also has really good developments through the manga.
Mm-hmm.
But I think all three characters are really strong. They're a great, like, team, a great trio of characters.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we haven't really, like, touched on Himiko too much, because she's a great character too. And hey, she's a great female character in a Jump manga. You don't see that a lot.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far. I would say that she is a great character and probably one of my favorite female characters in a Jump manga, though. Because just like the other characters, just like Switch and Basun, like, she has great backstory that informs, like, her character and why she behaves the way she does, and she also, like, grows a lot throughout the story. She decides to become a teacher towards the end of the story, and works really hard towards that, and ultimately becomes, like, the best at English in her class, and it's really nice to see. And, like, in the final story arc, because she's, like, the best at English in the class, she gets to write, like, the scenario for this big, like, event they have to put on, and that's really cool. So that was really nice. But also, I guess we focus more on Switch and Basun probably because Himiko's backstory is the simplest. It's still very relatable, but basically she be kind of
like her whole thing is that she's a former delinquent who has this sort of reputation about her. And when actually one of the things, because out of the three Sket Dance characters, it used to be I actually kind of liked her backstory the least, only because, not just because it's simple, but also because, like, with Switch and Basun, you know, their stories aren't as straightforward, and, like, anytime we delve into them more, we learn more about them, whereas with Himiko, I don't feel like we really learned that much new about her.
Yeah, Himiko's backstory is pretty, like, closed in terms of when it comes in and, like, how it leaves off. Whereas with Basun and Switch, at the end of, like, their backstories, there's still a lot more to explore, because at the end of Basun's backstory, it immediately takes us back to the present, and we learn, like, the ramifications of stuff that we saw in the backstory, and that changes kind of the status quo in the present when it, like, catches up. And then with Switch, it's like this ongoing mystery right up until, like, the very last couple chapters of the series of, like, how he joins Sket Dance, and then also if he'll ever decide to speak again. So that's a long-term character arc. And with Himiko, she, at the end of her backstory, because a big part of her backstory is that she was friends with this girl who ultimately kind of betrayed her or like blew her off. And so she lost trust in people, and eventually, you know, Basun and Takahashi, the captain of the baseball team, like they helped her out, and she was able, and she made friends with them, and she became indebted to Basun for helping her. So, you know, she agreed to join him as a member of Sket Dance. And then when we flash back to the present after Himiko's reflected on all this, she meets up with that friend who, you know, kind of treated her badly in the past, and they kind of make amends because that friend feels bad for what she did, and she was, like, visiting that park that they always used to hang out with all the time, like, to see if Himiko would ever show up, so, like, she could apologize one day. And so, you know, she apologizes, like, they make amends, and they go their separate ways, and that's basically, like, the end of all the things that come out of that backstory for a long time until we get to a later arc where Himiko goes to visit a friend she had before she became the Onihime back in Osaka, I believe. And then there's like a bunch of stuff there that happens. So that's like the only other time like where it really plays back into her backstory that heavily, aside from like general times when like a character is saying something like insensitive that hits home, like in the final arc, the new chairman of the school like says stuff that like relates to both Himiko and Switch's situations that like really, you know, hit home with them, and that's a big reason why they like fight back against the guy. But you know,
yeah, I mean, with Himiko in particular, like there's not as much to explore with her, but there isn't like anything, like there's not nothing. Like I like a lot of the material with a later character, Kato Kiri, who transfers over to Kaimei Academy, and he and Himiko kind of have a few discussions with each other that I really enjoy, because they relate to each other's situations and they both know where they're coming from. So I like a lot of that stuff. That some of that stuff's pretty great.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Ultimately, the Kato and Sabaki relationship becomes more important.
Yeah.
Afterwards, but that was a good relationship for that character and his arc as well.
Yeah, and I feel like obviously Tsubaki and Kato's relationship really does sort of end up mirroring Basun and Himiko's relationship very much.
Yeah, although Kato is a little more reverent of Tsubaki than Himiko is of Basun.
That's true, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Like the thing that really hits me about Sket Dance is that, you know, especially in Switch's case, that you know, both Himiko and Switch really were just like completely lost in their lives through one circumstance or another. And it's Basun that comes in and basically gives them like a purpose in life, because, you know, Himiko on one hand is just this wild delinquent who really has nothing to do but to take out her frustrations on, you know, people who want to, you know, want to have a bout with her, and pretty much closes herself off because of what happened to her other best friend from her hometown or whatever. And then you have Switch, who, because of the death of his brother, is just, you know, completely, I mean, they're both closed off from people, and they really don't feel like they don't really have anything to live for, especially in Switch's case. But, you know, I like that Basun kind of comes in and kind of sort of gives them a new meaning in life, and I feel like that's really inspiring.
Yeah, he tells them to use their strengths to help people, and I think that really inspires them. He is like their hero in a lot of ways, because he helps them out of those bad places in their lives. And so they also decide to help other people in the same way he helped them.
Not to get super personal, but like, you know, part of the reason the series means so much to me is because I have friends like that who are in a very, very bad place in their lives. Like a lot of my best friends now, I met in high school like years ago. They were moving in from like different states, and they kind of had points in their lives where, like, you know, they had trouble adjusting to a new environment, and they didn't really have any friends, you know, so late in their high school career. And, you know, they both really wanted to make a point to kind of close themselves off and, not make any friends because it's like, they didn't really feel like there was a point. And then eventually, we all met each other and then things just kind of went from there and they realized, oh, that's kind of dumb. I should really start making friends again. So, I mean, my circumstances aren't nearly as tragic as either of them, but, that's part of the reason it hits home for me is because I have friends like that. So it's like, I totally understand, where these three are coming from and I relate to it very much personally. So that's probably the biggest reason why I love the series so much.
Yeah, I think it has a really great message for especially young readers that you shouldn't isolate yourself. You shouldn't feel like you have nothing to offer the world because everyone has something special about them that can be of help to others. And then everyone deserves, to have companionship and friends, and no one should be alone, and you shouldn't wall yourself away from the world because you have a lot to offer and there are a lot of people out there who want to be your friend or want to know you, and there is happiness out there for you even if you think that you can never be happy again. And so I think that's really moving and really inspiring, and especially for young readers who might not know what direction they want to go in life, or if they're feeling alone. I think this was a great series for that audience. And even as an adult, I relate to a lot of it, especially things that can be applied to lessons about dealing with depression and loneliness and stuff like that. So this was really cathartic to read at times.
Yeah, there's especially some great lessons in the final arc, which we'll definitely be getting to a little later. I want to kind of save my thoughts on those for a little later in the discussion, but man, some of the messages in that final arc are really honestly pretty amazing. Something I took away from the series was that, if you have the ability to, you should help people, but you should also be able to accept help from other people as well.
Yeah, that's important.
Because that's definitely something that I've struggled with, something that I know a lot of people have struggled with who, might have a little too much pride and think, oh, I can just do all this myself. But, there's nothing wrong with asking for help or accepting help. And I think that's a lesson that the series pulls off very well. But I guess something else I kind of want to move on to a little bit. Speaking of, we were kind of pointing out similarities with Gintama. So, I mean, we are going to be bringing up Gintama a lot, mostly because Kenta Shinohara used to work as an assistant for Hideaki Sorachi, the creator of Gintama, who obviously Shinohara eventually went on to create his own series, Sket Dance, and then later Astro Lost in Space. Basically went on to do his own work. I don't think I know how long exactly he was an assistant for Sorachi, but I'm assuming he worked with him for at least a little while. So obviously, with that connection in mind, when Sket Dance kind of became a bit more, I guess, relevant, and as more people started noticing it, I see people all the time who blow Sket Dance off because, they just assume, oh, it's just a ripoff of Gintama. Three people who do odd jobs? No, that's too similar. It's a ripoff. And, the series, Sket Dance kind of pokes fun at itself, or I should really say Gintama pokes fun at it. Gintoki, I think at one point literally calls Sket Dance the poor man's Gintama.
I think Sket Dance also makes fun of itself for its similarities to Gintama. I believe there's a joke like that in the first chapter to begin with.
Yeah, I think there is too. But personally, I feel like people take... I don't know, I feel like people may take those comments a little too seriously.
Yeah, it's too reductive a statement to say that Sket Dance is a ripoff of Gintama. All they have is just similar premise of three people are in this odd job team and they help other people. But that's really the extent of where the similarities in their premises lie. But beyond that, they're completely different series in terms of the setting, subject matter, and the way they explore their characters. The only other comparison that I feel is valid is when you're talking about their humor styles.
Yeah.
But even then, I feel like Sorachi and Shinohara's sense of humor differs a little slightly in terms of what they go for. It's still pretty similar in terms of like the use of Sakomi gags, characters reacting on the craziness of other characters. There's a bunch of pop culture references still. So they have similar styles, but I feel like in execution, I feel just a different vibe from the series that it's hard to like put in the words, but it all has to tie into the setting and then how the humor relates to the characters. Because with Gintama, I feel like the characters can do all sorts of crazy things and they can get into a bunch of over-the-top kind of shenanigans, larger-than-life kind of things. But Sket Dance is a little more grounded, so it's taking place in this more domestic, like, school-life setting. And while there are, like, fantasy one-off chapters, and there's also times where the series gets really ridiculous, it's contrasted with, you know, the serious, grounded portions of the series, which the problems the characters tend to have are stuff that you could imagine like a real person having problems with.
Yeah.
And in Gintama, like, the situations are more like kind of an extreme, like, fantastical kind of problem. Like, there's still maybe a serious problem, like, you can feel a lot for the characters. But, spoiler for Gintama here, it's less relatable that you had to kill your mentor and then that mentor comes back to life, like, as this new person, this new evil person. Then there is a situation in Sket Dance with what, like, especially the main trio have to deal with finding out about, like, who their parents really were, or being a delinquent and isolating themselves and then learning to, you know, become friends with people, or like being a shut-in and just walling yourself off from the world after a big tragedy that you feel you were at fault for. Like, those feel like really relatable problems I can imagine a real person having. So I feel that gives a different context for when you see the characters behave in a humorous setting. Like, it feels different when the characters are making a joke, because it feels like more like a joke you can imagine. That feels, I guess relatable is the only word I can put it. It's really hard to pinpoint exactly what the difference in the comedy is, but it feels different when you're reading these series.
Well, I think one of the main components of why it's different is that Sket Dance's humor is not nearly at all as dirty as Gintama's is. At all.
It can go to dirty places, though.
It can, but Gintama is definitely that extreme.
There's not as many dick jokes in Sket Dance.
Not at all, really.
Yeah. So, like, Shinohara and Sorachi, there we go. I think Shinohara and Sorachi have different, like, tastes in humor. Like, tastes in things they find funny. Even though, and the style they execute their humor is similar, but the taste and subject matter of the humor is different. There we go. I think that's the core of it.
I was going to say, I feel like you brought this point up. I feel like it's definitely in the setting, too, because Sket Dance's setting is way more grounded than Sorachi's is. Sorachi can literally get away with whatever he wants to, and, like, it somehow works.
I mean, Gintama is set in an anachronistic Edo where it's been invaded by aliens, so they have modern technology and futuristic technology, but most of the human characters are wearing, like, mid-1800s Japanese clothing.
And also there are aliens that Sorachi just kind of gives up on using at one point. But yeah, like, the most, I guess really the most fantastical element to Sket Dance's world is that their club supervisor, Chuma Sensei, deals with chemicals and is sort of a lazy mad scientist. And, you know, sometimes they accidentally drink their potions in the form of cola, and they never fucking learn, ever, not to drink anything around Chuma Sensei. But that's really about it. Like you said, Sket Dance is just more grounded in general, and I feel like the problems that the characters in Sket Dance go through are more relatable, But as far as both series goes, thankfully the emotions that the characters go through in both series are still very relatable, I think, in particular.
Yeah, but at the core of it, Sket Dance and Gintama are not that similar.
No.
It's really reductive to say that Sket Dance is a ripoff in particular because it's about stuff that's so different than what Gintama is about.
Yeah.
And, like, what the story leads to is so different than what Gintama's story leads to.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. Like Gintama fans think it's hard to get other people into Gintama. Try getting other people in the Sket Dance. Like, they won't even look twice. Like, I've had troubles trying to convince people that Sket Dance is actually good. But, you know, it's one of those things where, like, here's a similarity between both series. Both people just assume it's just all comedy all the time, and there are no, like, meaningful characters at all, and they don't go through anything. It's just a bunch of poop and fart and dick jokes or whatever, and it's all just comedy all the time.
It's so weird whenever I hear you say that about, like, Gintama and Sket Dance, that people have that perception of them, because whenever I've heard of them, the reputation that I had heard for them before I ever got into them was that they had super serious arcs, and those were, like, the real draw. Like, with Sket Dance in particular, before, like, ever read it, for, like, years, the reputation it had was for the backstories of the character and, like, how incredible they were. So it's, like, really interesting to me, because there's, like, this one half who has this perception that these series are just ostensibly comedies always, and then there's this other half who, like, sees that the big draw of these series are the serious arcs and character drama moments. So it's like there's this weird divide and disconnect between, like, what people know about these series before going into it and, like, what is attracting them to read them.
I mean, granted, I don't hear people say that as much about Sket Dance as they do Gintama. Gintama, unfortunately, I feel like has more of that stigma where people just assume it's all just comedy and there's like no nuance to it. But, like,
yeah,
it is a problem that both series do have. Like, I've met way too many people in my life who just kind of dismiss both series, especially Gintama. I used to know a guy who would just call Gintama Japanese Family Guy and literally couldn't grasp that, oh, maybe Gintama is sort of genre savvy, like it's not just a comedy, it could be more than one thing. But I think that's just a problem with just media in general, where people just think, oh, it's just this one thing, and it can't be anything else.
I think also with Gintama is that it is comedy focused most of the time, and it's so long that if people see a random episode, it might just be a comedy episode. Because I definitely have experienced this before, where, like, long time back, or maybe just 2 or so years back, when I posted, like, a list of, like, all the serious arcs in Gintama, or quote unquote, all the plot relevant arcs in Gintama, because I got a friend of mine, Spark a Spirit on Animation Revelation, he wanted to get into the series, but he only really cared about the plot stuff, so I gave him a list of plot arcs. And then, like, someone else in the thread who knew Gintama, it was like, what? Gintama has a plot? So, yeah, people who have, like, just a cursory knowledge of Gintama probably don't realize that it does have an overarching plot and character development and stuff. I just think it is a bunch of episodic comedy stuff. But I think Sket Dance, just because the Switch's backstory in particular, just because the backstories and dramatic moments are just so standout and well written, that it earned the reputation for that more so than its comedy. At least for the amount of time that I've known about the series and what I had heard about the series that people were really talking about with it.
I remember when I first got into Sket Dance, I was still, like, you know, posting on forums and stuff at the time, you know. I was asking around, like, hey, so what do people think of these, like, backstories? Because, like, at the time, I had heard so, like, I don't want to, like, you know, completely dismiss your experience with, like, what people think about Sket Dance, because, like, I did see that around too, where it's like, oh yeah, like, the backstories for all these characters are so good. Now I would see that around a lot too, before I actually got into it. And I was really afraid that the hype wasn't gonna I felt like I was being set up to be disappointed. For some reason, I was just like, are they really that good? I guess I'll see. I guess I'll see what everybody's talking about. Thankfully, Switches is the first of the three characters' backstories, because holy shit, I think I cried for a whole 2 days because when you first see Switch's backstory, or at least when I did, that affected me so much, because I never ever in a million years would have thought that a series like Sket Dance would go in this sort of direction at all. There's I don't want to give away too much, but there's death involved and actual depression, and it deals with a lot of really heavy shit in the beginning, which I really wasn't expecting. So yeah, in a very short time, Switch became pretty much one of my favorite characters just in general. That was a trip. And I have a friend who I also was watching Sket Dance with up until we got to that episode with Switch's backstory, and it affected him so much that he hasn't watched any since. Cause it depresses him so much. He's actually afraid to watch anymore. I've totally just remembered, I wanted to, I guess while we're talking about the similarities and differences between Gintama and Sket Dance, kind of transitions into what I want to talk about. I want to I'm going to use that as a transition to kind of talk about what I really one of my favorite aspects about Sket Dance. Because one of the biggest differences I feel between both series is that, and I want to try to pick my words carefully here, and I want to see how to explain this here. So, obviously both series are known for its for breaking the fourth wall. I feel like Gintama more so really goes out of its way to break the fourth wall. Sket Dance does it too, though. But so in Gintama's case, while there is a lot of fourth wall breaking, and sometimes literally in the first chapter of Gintama in particular, there's a moment where Gin has this cool scene where he's gonna fight back all the Amanto trying to kidnap Shinpachi's sister while Shinpachi and her run away. And then literally a page later, Gintoki is running away from them, and Shinpachi's like, hey, weren't you supposed to fight those guys? And Gin, I forget exactly what he says. He says something along the lines of do you know how long it takes to draw pages of action sequences or whatever? And, that stuff is great. But I feel sometimes what Gintama kind of lacks is that, as much as Gintama breaks the fourth wall, I feel Gintama, the manga in particular, and I will admit I have not read all of the manga, but I've read enough to see that, to have the opinion that I feel Gintama doesn't really, the manga in particular, I don't feel utilizes the medium of comics very much. I feel the one moment that really kind of sticks out in my mind and is an example of what I'm talking about is during an arc where the odd jobs accidentally stop time, or more so Gin accidentally freeze time, and at one point in their attempt to try to freeze and refreeze time, Gin uses one of the manga sound effects to, in comedic effect for something. I forget exactly what was going on. I think it leads to a dick and balls joke. I don't know. It's Gintama. But yeah, Gintoki literally breaks off a piece of a manga sound effect and uses it for whatever. And I feel Gintama doesn't do enough of that kind of thing. Whereas Sket Dance, I feel utilizes that very much. And it kind of leads into some of my favorite material outside of the more, serious stuff is where, what was it? So I forget which chapter it is. There's a chapter where the Sket Dan and their social studies teacher, Yamanobe Sensei, his whole thing is that he has a lot of really weird, obscure board games and video games that he's always having the Sket Dance try out, because he has a weird games club or something, from knockoffs of Mario to really weird maybe tennis games. I don't know. I don't even know what that first game is they play, but it's pretty fun.
Hyperion?
Hyperion, yeah. And I forget what game they're playing, but it's a game involving mustaches, and that's all I remember. in this particular game, part of the like gimmick of the game is that you get like fired up while playing it, and by fired up, like you're actually on fire, and it leads to this thing where basically the Sket Dance set their entire club room on fire, and in literally the next chapter, they're reprimanded for that, and they have to face the Board of Education, and so like. They basically have to explain themselves because obviously setting fire to your own club room is kind of a serious offense. Like that's property damage. Like you have to be punished for that in the real world.
It's surprising this is the first time they're really getting punished for that, since that is not the first time they've set something on fire.
Exactly, yeah. So like they basically have to explain themselves, but like the Sket Dan have to, they try to basically figure out a way to explain this is a gag manga, that kind of thing happens. But like the disciplinary committee just doesn't understand that, and they're just kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, can you actually like tell us what happened? But no, so they have a really hard time explaining that, which is great. Which also leads into this whole thing where like all the people they have helped come in to help them, and Basun is like, is this like the final chapter? Or like, what's going on?
I mean, that's an incredible moment. I really love like the community formed around the Sket Dan, all the people that they help, and like how they come to their defense when they're in trouble. Like that was a great moment. I think it's like equivalent to that moment in Gintama at the beginning of the Silver Soul arc, where like all the characters were like, in the absence of the Yorizua, they were like trying to defend Edo until they like get there. Like to me, it's kind of like that. Like you see all the supporting characters come to the defense, or like in support of like the main trio who has helped them like throughout the course of the story.
Yeah, so except in this case with Sket Dance, it's kind of played off as more of a joke.
It is, but I still thought it was a really sweet moment.
No, I mean, it is still a pretty good moment. But, so from there, like, you know, they get out of it eventually. So after they burn down the club room and they have to deal with the Board of Education, then they have to share the room. They have to share a room with the student council for a little bit until their room gets renovated. There's a great other thing where like, another thing too, Sket Dance also has like these popularity poll chapters and stuff. And while they don't go on as long as Gintama's popularity poll arc does, they get pretty creative. Like their second popularity poll, they basically just have the Sket Dan guess which random character who got like a minute number of votes and like what place they have in the popularity contest, and they make like
That's a really fun way to do it too. Like you had to guess like what character placed where. So that was a really cool way of delivering that. I also like the first one just for the buildup of it, because the entire time you're wondering where Basun is gonna place, and he's like freaking out during the entire chapter because like so many weird characters are getting placements in strange places, and then but it culminates really nicely when you finally get to reveal that yes, he was number one, and then everyone like, you know, guys rather than lift him up in the air and whatever, and like it's really nice.
There's also a great moment while we're talking about like meta jokes where like Kenta Shinohara appears for a bit.
Yeah, and he was like, "Whoa, I'm in this." And he's like number 11 too.
And his assistants are like, "Dude, what are you doing?"
Yeah,
and of course Roman of all people hears him, and then everyone else is like, "What are you guys doing?"
Yeah. Roman is the character who breaks the fourth wall the most, and is the most aware of the fourth wall. She is a mangaka, and she draws like these really like badly drawn shoujo manga, but they're so absurd in their plots that they're kind of interesting because they're so weird. So she ultimately ends up becoming like a professional mangaka, or at least she eventually becomes an assistant to one. No, she does get published. She has her one-shot actually published in the magazine.
Yeah, and then she becomes an assistant afterwards. So, you know, she's on her way.
And it's all just because her manga is interesting, even though they are not necessarily the best drawn or even written. But yeah, she has great gags where she'll like be aware of like she'll make the most meta jokes. Like, she'll break the pages to make her introduction, or she'll refer back to something that happened on a previous page and like flip pages back. So she is like she's like really fun for how Shinohara writes her as this like character who is like super aware of the fourth wall, that she can like break the manga in a way to do absurd things.
No, yeah, she's honestly probably one of my favorite side characters. But speaking of fourth wall breaks, going back to the popularity poll chapter I was talking about, the loser of that game has to be turned into a stick figure for the entirety of the next chapter. And so Basun, spoiler alert, ultimately loses. And so Shinohara literally draws him as a stick figure for the entirety of the next chapter. And like everybody's just like playing with his stick parts, and it's kind of weird. And Tsubaki,
and the best part is how it's worded, because it's worded that you have to be a stick figure for a week. So in that chapter itself, like, it plays with, okay, how much amount of time does that mean? Does that mean just the length of the chapter? Or in universe, does that mean like a week? And that's really great, because everyone treats Basu normally in that chapter, even though he's a stick figure, and like his body is such as a stick figure that he does like, you know, stuff that only a stick figure can do. And Tsubaki's the only one who like questioned this and is like freaking out. It's like wondering, okay, when is he like gonna turn back? What's the deal with this?
Like, why is everybody just accepting this?
And in the universe it takes a week, because that was the technicality.
I love stuff like that, where like a series just gets so absurd that the straight man is wondering, wait, is this normal? I think this is normal. Maybe I'm wrong. I love stuff like that. So that's definitely one of my favorite chapters of the entirety of the series.
That was really good, yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things I really love about Sket Dance, is that I really do feel like, compared to Gintama, Shinohara really does play with the medium a lot. And I think to a very absurd and fun degree. Like, it's I don't know. Like, I appreciate that about the series so much, because I feel like that's where some of the best comedy comes from, personally speaking. Because I feel like a lot of those jokes always hit bullseye.
Yeah, I agree. I love Roman chapters, and I love all the times where they play on meta aspects and break the fourth wall and stuff. Like, they always do it in a very clever way.
You know what, actually? I just realized that as much as I've been mentioning the Student Council, we haven't really, like, talked about them as characters at all.
Yeah, so the Student Council, we said this before in our previous review of Sket Dance as well, but the Student Council is basically the Shinsengumi to the Sket Dance Yorozuya. They're kind of like rivals, but more often than not, they're more like allies that help each other. The most important character in the Student Council is Tsubaki, or Sasuke Tsubaki, who's very similar to Basun in terms, like, he's very dedicated to, like, helping people. The difference with Tsubaki is that, like, he's very strict in following the rules.
He's very rigid.
Upholding that. So very early on, when Tsubaki is first introduced, he is trying to get, you know, the Sket Dance disbanded because they keep breaking regulations. And he is very irritated with that. And he also, like, is so strict to the rules that he, like, calls out them having Momoka, a student from another school, you know, hanging out with them, saying that she shouldn't be allowed on premises because she's a delinquent and stuff. So it kind of really illustrates at the beginning of the series that Tsubaki is very interested in helping people, but he's very strict in following the rules of the school. And, like, even the rest of the student council are not as obsessed with that as him. In fact, they don't really care at all.
Especially the president,
who is the student council president, is super lazy and just does not care. He, like, approved the Sket Dance just on a whim. He did not really, he doesn't care too much about, like, following the rules to the letter, but Tsubaki is. Over the course of the series, though, he slowly grows to allow exceptions, allow himself to be a little lax, and take each situation into account and, like, the people into account to better help them. that's really, like, exemplified in how he helped Kato Kiri, like, later on in the series, with his situation with that, like, bad teacher that Kato was dealing with, and, like, saving Kato from, like, getting himself expelled by exposing that teacher, which was a really great moment for him. But what's very interesting about the Tsubaki and Bassoon rivalry is that they make a point to point out how similar these characters are in, like, their behaviors and attitudes. And then later on, it's revealed there's a deeper reason for that, and that they're actually brothers who were separated by birth, which ties into Bassoon's backstory of how his parents died, and his mother decided to give one of her babies, because she gave birth to twins, she decided to give one of her babies to the doctor, who he and his wife did not have any children of their own because they couldn't conceive. So, because she knew that her friend Akane, I believe, who decided to take care of Bassoon, because she knew that she couldn't handle being a single parent of, like, 2 children, she decided to give one of her babies to the doctor. And so they were raised separately from birth, even though they didn't realize it, but their paths intertwined in an interesting way when they were children, in that Bassoon actually, like, inspired Tsubaki to become a person who could stand up for others and not be weak and, like, a crybaby like he was as a kid. So Bassoon inspired Tsubaki to be the way he was, kinda.
And he doesn't even know it.
Yeah, he doesn't even know it, and I don't think they ever actually realize it, but it's, like, really interesting. And then from that point on, like, the Bassoon-Tsubaki relationship is probably my favorite relationship in the series, because I love how it develops. Like, from the place it starts, it's, you know, Tsubaki at the beginning of the manga was not actually I didn't really care for him that much, because he seemed like just too strict, like too much, like not as sympathetic, you know. But once it develops, once we, like, get that revelation about, like, him and Bassoon being brothers, and then, like, see how he kind of softens after that, and see, like, the playful relationship they have, and how they help each other out as Tsubaki eventually has to take up the mantle as the new student council president once Ageha retires. Like, it's really, really just compelling relationship, and those are some of my favorite moments, like them just talking to each other to become closer throughout the course of the series, and when they finally, like, call each other, like, big brother, little brother, like, later on and stuff. It's really, really sweet. So Tsubaki is the most important character in the student council. He gets the most development, and he does the most outside of just being in the student council, because he ends up helping the Sket Dance a lot. And most of the student council plots end up revolving around him. Aside from him, we have Ageha, who...
Agata.
As we mentioned before... Agata, sorry. Who is Ageha? I don't know. Anyway, Agata is the student council president, but honestly, he doesn't do that much while he's the student council president. His most memorable thing he did to me was during the Vivid Battle arc, when he showed off, like, how insanely smart and calculating he is, but also when he had that card battle with Bassoon, which was insanely complicated, but neat in terms of, like, how he outwitted Bassoon. And the big character moment he had there was, like, he noticed that the sponsor of the Vivid Battle had bribed, like, the judges to have, like, Roman lose in the previous match. So, you know, he, like, stands up to them and says, like, that is not right. And, you know, so that was a good moment. But aside from that, he doesn't really get to do much afterwards. Outside, I mean, like, the student council has their own comedy chapters, but, like, he doesn't get anything big dramatic to do. But later on, after he leaves the council, he has this really funny but strange left turn of an arc where he gets, like, super paranoid and obsessive over his little sister's, like, love life, because he misinterprets, like, who she's in love with, and, like, becomes really obsessed and protective of her, and it leads to a bunch of misunderstandings that ultimately end up affecting, like, his grades and his test scores and entrance exams to college. So they have to go through great lengths to try and clear up his misunderstandings and get him to focus on the exam so he can pass and actually go to college. So it was really strange for a character who was, like, kind of pretty laid back and serious to suddenly become super, like, weirdly obsessive about his little sister later on, but it was pretty funny, so I don't mind. And related to that is the other, like, third year at the beginning of the series who is, you know, in the student council with Gata, Michiru Shinba, who it has even less to do out of all the student council members in the series. Cause his thing is that he's really good looking and good at cooking. He has one chapter outside of the Vivage battle where he gets to show off his cooking, and that he, like, does this cooking show that, the student council and the Sket Dance, like, mess up. But aside from that, he doesn't do anything else notable in the student council but later on, when a god is, like, distracting himself with Saya's love life, he becomes, like, the voice of reason to Agata and tries to help him out because he understands the situation better than anyone, because he can see, like, the love pentagon or whatever that is there, and he's trying to clear up the misunderstandings, but somehow it ends up that Agata misunderstands that Michiru is in love with Saya, which he's not, and that just causes further complications.
Oh boy.
But eventually, he ultimately manages to succeed in helping Agata out, but so it was interesting. He didn't do much at first, but then eventually he was essential to that subplot.
I personally liked learning about how he became student council president, kind of sort of out of this, sort of out of the desire to kind of, like, you know, make Kaime a more laid back institution. Like, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was neat. That was also something, though, that came after he left the student council. So it goes a long time before we really get much out of Michiru, because he and Nagita are on the student council for, like, the first 150 chapters, so the first 3 years of serializations. But so it takes a much amount of time before he really does anything. And then we have
Unyu?
Yeah, Unyu, yeah, she's the rich girl, and she's kind of, like, outwardly, like, really nice. I don't know if she really had that much else to her personality besides that. But there was that one funny chapter where, like, they broke this, like, toy car or whatever, or they were, like, looking for this toy car, so they went to her mansion, and it was, like, insanely huge or whatever. And, like, both her and her dad were, like, weirdly chill as rich people, and they were, like, over this, like, toy car or whatever. I don't remember the details of that completely, but that was a strange but funny chapter.
I think it's because they were willing to spend so much money just to get this one toy car fixed that, like, Basun and Tsubaki feel, like, really humbled accepting, like, that much help and money, that they feel really bad.
Yeah, that was good. And then we get Daisy, Kyukuno Asahina, and she's, like, very serious as well. She throws a bunch of harsh insults at people all the time that are like, get really elaborate at places.
They're acronym insults. It's really weird.
Oh yeah, DOS is, like, the main one. I forget what it stands for, but she says that a lot. DOS, D-O-S.
Yeah.
So she actually has an arc where she has to learn to accept help from Tsubaki. And the arc is literally called Tsubaki and Daisy. So that was a really good arc for her in terms of, like, character development. And then after Tsubaki takes over the student council, Kirikata, who we mentioned before, who's, like, this ninja guy who is really into, like, justice and helping people in his way, which can be extreme at times. Eventually, after Tsubaki wins them over, because at first when he joins the council, he kind of does it on a whim and also like in defiance of like Tsubaki. Like he doesn't like get along or obey Tsubaki's orders. He's just a rogue agent. But then after Tsubaki helps him out in exposing that bad teacher he had in middle school for the scumbag he was, like he becomes super indebted to Tsubaki and really loyal to him, to the fact that he like always like follows him around and watches his back and is like super obsessive over him. So I liked him more when he became that kind of character, I guess, than he was at the beginning. But his development in between was very good. And then finally, the last one is Hana Uzumi, who is basically launched from Dragon Ball in that she has a split personality. In her default personality, she's just this kind of quiet, demure girl who like will refuse to talk to boys because she has a phobia of them, and so she will talk to male characters through another female character. So she'll say whatever she has to say to, like, say Tsubaki to Onyu or Daisy, and then they'll say what she's saying to Tsubaki, even though they're in the same room and he can hear everything she's saying. And then when she gets touched by a boy, she turns into Bunny. And then she becomes, like, super flirty and a seductress, I guess. So she has a whole arc about learning to be comfortable around boys and accepting, like, those two parts of her personality and overcoming that, which culminates in, like, this play where she has to interact as herself around other male characters. So, like, she ultimately has a good arc, but her gag does get a little old.
Yeah.
I feel. So
I think I might have tweeted about this in my thread, but I think I said something along the lines of, hey, look, it's Lunch from Dragon Ball, except not as funny, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, she has more character development than Launch, you could say, but she's definitely not. Her joke does not get as much mileage.
No, that running gag does get kind of old quickly, honestly. Yeah. But
so compared to the Sket Dance, I feel like overall the student council as a group aren't like equally strong as characters. They're not all equally like developed or like rich in development. As a group, they work good in like comedy chapters though they're not as fun as the Sket Dance. But like Tsubaki is definitely like, if we said before that Switch and Bossoon were our like favorite characters or the characters we thought were like the best in the series, I think Tsubaki is like up there with them in terms of his character arc. And also, you know, he is a funny character too. Like he is like an innocent boy at heart, and there's some good gags with that. I really love the chapter when he's making these terrible t-shirts, and he has just the funniest expression whenever anyone like tells him that the t-shirt kind of sucks, and he has like this really funny shocked expression. I just loved it. His interactions with Boston are adorable.
I was just scrolling through my thread, and I was immediately reminded of the chapter where they're both the Sket Dance and the student council are supposed to shovel snow, but then they end up snowball fighting, and Tsubaki gets like super into it.
Yeah.
That was pretty good too. But no, yeah. So the student council, as a group, I think they work better than they do individually, unfortunately. But Tsubaki, I think Tsubaki and Agata are probably my favorite out of the five, I guess, honestly.
Yeah, they get the most development, I feel, because I don't think Hana has an arc throughout multiple chapters, Kiri has an arc throughout multiple chapters, but Daisy has that one arc, and that's all, and then Onyu doesn't really have an arc, so, but she's mostly just a comedy character.
Yeah.
But, like, Agata is really just of good personality that's like fun whenever he's like around, even though he doesn't do that much, but like he does get his moments, and like they can be very funny and also just very cool, like we've said before. And then Tsubaki again has like one of the best character arcs next to Switch and Basu. Yeah.
But I guess as long as we're talking about like side characters, I guess we want to we don't have to go through all of them because it is a very expansive cast, but
yeah,
I guess we could talk about at least a few of them.
Yeah, a lot of them have, like, their recurring gags, and, like, when they appear in a chapter, you can kind of tell what the chapter will kind of be about.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, Chuma Sensei chapters. Chuma will usually have, like, this weird, like, invention or, like, potion that he's concocted that will cause weird side effects, and that'll be the chapter, like, dealing with those weird side effects. Like, the big one that gets repeated a lot is the potion that turns you back into a child. So the first time it happens is Basun, and then it happens to Himiko and Momoka. A long time later, it happens to Sabaki. So that happens quite a few times.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of other weird potions that he does throughout the series. Related to him is Misora Reimi Sensei, who's like this clutchy teacher's assistant who comes in a year or so serialization into the series, I think, and eventually she falls for Chuma and tries to start a relationship with him, which actually does like happen during the middle of the series, and that was really nice. And then we have Yamanobe, who's like the other like major teacher. And he, as we mentioned before, he comes up with the weird games like Genesis and Hyperion, all of which were supposedly taught to him by some guy called Master Wan. And yeah, those are really fun. Just the absurdity of the games he comes up with.
Just to list some of my favorites, like we talked about Roman. She's definitely one of my favorite characters. Shinzo is another one of my favorites. He's one of the more earlier characters. He's from the Kendo Club, and he's
super into being a samurai.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like Shinzo a lot. He has a lot of great chapters and appearances early on. Like, his thing is that he acts like a samurai and, like, tries to put on that, like, image, but he uses technology a lot, like cell phone, and they call him out for it for being, like, anachronistic and not committing to his image. So that's a lot of fun. And he gets over, like, his, like, gimmick that he's introduced to it, that he's like, he can't like fight seriously unless he eats like this candy. But he gets over that in like a really cool moment, like pretty early on, and then it doesn't play that much role later on. But just in general, he's like a funny character. But I was also like really sad at a certain point because there's a long stretch of chapters where he really doesn't show up a whole lot or do anything. Like, I think all the chapters in like the hundreds, like there are a long stretch of time where he just does not appear. Roman also disappears for a long time, but she makes more cameos than Shinzo does. But towards the end of the series, he gets more prominent again.
Yeah, Shinzo's sort of relegated to like, I guess what some people would call like butt monkey status, where like he's kind of the butt of the jokes. Not most of the, like, at some point during the run, because he doesn't show up as much, and people, like, constantly talk about how he's not, like, a popular character or anything, and... Yeah,
he gets kind of Yamcha'd, you know? Like, he starts off as, like, one of the most important characters, but then eventually he's, like, a C-tier side character.
One of my favorite moments is, there's a chapter with different vignettes of, characters giving each other like Valentine's chocolates, and Shinzo just has a little bubble at the end saying like, "Oh, I got chocolates from my mom." Like, I think that moment definitely encapsulates like kind of the status of his character at the time. Like,
yeah. But unlike Yamcha, he bounces back because he gets a good send off. Him and Takahashi to like the end of their club activities in a really nice emotional chapter.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And then it gets involved in like group events towards the end as well. And speaking of, Takahashi is another character I like. They refer to her as Captain most of the time in the manga because she's captain of the baseball team. She's basically Sket Dance's most ardent supporter, though.
Yeah, she's there from the beginning.
Yeah, from the beginning. She directs people to Sket Dance and is supportive of them. She, helped, like, Himiko kind of break out of her shell and, like, by befriending her, and also encouraged her to join Basun and Sket Dance. So she's very important to Himiko as a friend. And eventually, she also directs Saya to the Sket Dance later on. And just in general, she is like the person who like the Sket Dance will most hang out with regularly.
Yeah.
Because like she's kind of Himiko's best friend. And she has her other like recurring gags. Like she's a big eater, and the joke is that she can eat so fast you can't even see her eat.
It just like dematerializes.
Yeah. So that was really good. And then she had this weakness to something, I forget.
Eggs.
To eggs. Like, she can't eat eggs and it makes her throw up. So that, like, affected them when they were trying to win this, like, all-you-can-eat contest. And, like, there were eggs in it and she couldn't hold it in, so she barfed it up. Yeah, and she also got super into... What was the game? Was it...
Hyperion.
Genesis? Yeah. In the...
Or no,
I think it was Genesis.
No,
it was the Genesis Grand Prix.
It was Genesis.
Yeah, so they go into the Genesis. She joins the Sket Dance to go to the Genesis Grand Prix, and she becomes super good at Genesis. And she becomes MVP, and then the winner of the Grand Prix is supposed to marry, like, the king of the island or whatever, but she, like, eats everything in the feast, and, like, so I guess the king calls it off because, you don't have enough food to feed this girl. But she was into it just because she could eat all the food. So that was funny. But yeah, I liked her a lot.
Another one of my favorite side characters is probably Koma. The really tall, quiet girl whose thing is she can mimic different, like, feudal lords. It's really, it's a very specific character quirk, but I really like it. And also, one of my, I love her because, like, you know, she's a very quiet character and she's not very outspoken. And Shinohara depicts that by just, like, completely, like, shrinking down her dialogue into, like, a normal sized, dialogue bubble. And that's always funny. I always enjoy those. And she always, like, decimates Bossoon.
Yeah, cause she's super strong. So, like, when she pushes someone, they call that, like, the Koma cannon.
Yeah.
Because the force of it is just so powerful. So there's some good gags with that, especially when they introduced that little pervert guy later on.
Oh my god!
What's his name?
I don't know. I think his name is Sakura or Sakuraba. So one of the two.
Yeah, they introduced that kid. It takes an interest in her, and one chapter, like, they go to her house, and he's, like, super, like, being pervy and weird, and, like, Boston's, like, trying to not set Koma off because she's, like, super shy and sensitive to, like, all the stuff he's saying.
Oh, and all of her family are giants.
Yeah. And all of her family are giants. Like, they're all super big. And eventually, I think Boston's the one who messes up and, like, he gets blasted out by all three of them. And it's, like, really funny.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Sakura, I don't know how I feel about him. Sometimes I think...
I didn't like him that much. I mean...
That's totally understandable.
It's kind of funny because he is funny a lot of the time because of just how unapologetically pervy he is. Like, I really found it funny that one arc where, like, this girl... He was trying to confess to this girl or whatever, but, like, he intentionally, like, just messes it up by revealing his true pervy nature and scares the girl off, and then he's, like, with his buddies, he's like, yeah, perverts for life or something. That was, like, a funny reversal, because he took it seriously all the way up until, like, the part where he revealed what he was really like to that girl. Like, he was taking, like, the confession seriously. So it's, like, weird. It was really funny, like, turnaround there, because you think he's gonna change and he doesn't. But he just kind of, like, fizzles out of the series at some point too. Like, he has a lot of stories for a while, but then, like, towards the end of the series, I don't think he appears that much. Like, I don't remember him doing anything in the final arc at all.
No, he wasn't really that important of a character. My favorite moment with him is where him and his club eventually join Boston and his friends at the beach during when he accidentally drinks Chuma's invisibility potion, and so they decide to use it for pervy things. I think the thing with the potion is, like, it works as long as you don't move your body.
Oh yeah, that one was a good chapter. So, like, if you stay still, like, you're invisible. So, like, they get into a situation where, like, they can, like, be super close to someone without them noticing, so that they can, peek at them in, bad places. So that was really funny, like, how the ways they exploited that. And then the Michael Jackson kind of
that's always going to be, like, one of the most amazing out of context panels in any manga I will ever see.
Yeah, and another good arc of his was like when Tsubaki was trying to shut down like his pervert club. I forget what they were officially called.
The Gesu Club.
The Gesu. That was what they call it. So Tsubaki was trying to shut down the Gesu Club because he didn't see a point to it. So like Sakura had to try and pretend like that the club was like about something other than it was about. It was trying to mask its perfect nature, and they did such a bad job at it. But ultimately, somehow, it ended up working out. So that was a funny chapter too. So he's a funny character. He's just not as a character. He's just not necessarily likable.
Personally, sometimes I think his shtick is funny, but other times it gets kind of old.
Yeah.
So like I don't always think he's funny.
He runs into this problem when he's first introduced that he gets a lot of storylines in close proximity to each other, but he's a character that works best when you go for a while without seeing him, and then he comes back and does something funny. I think Roman is the same way. I think it's actually good that her chapters are as sporadic as they are, because if she was in every chapter, that might, get tiresome after a while. But because she comes in every once in a while, like they're always like refresh and funny, and I enjoy them a lot.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing about the characters for the series is that, yeah, some of them sort of get the shaft for a while, but also on the same token, like, they don't get overused, which I think is good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, speaking of Roman and Sakura, I do remember at one point there's a chapter where like both Bosun and Himiko make a bet with each other to see how long they can go without commenting on each other's like actions and stuff. Basically, they ban Tsukomi from the club room, and there's just a moment where Switch literally brings Roman and Sakura together, and that ultimately breaks them. And that's pretty amazing. Like they sort of form this like kind of camaraderie with each other to the point where like Roman comes out of nowhere to high five Sakura at one point out of nowhere, and I love stupid moments like that.
Yeah, it was really funny seeing those two characters together and see them like befriend each other because they're both super weird, but they're on the same wavelength of their weirdness.
It's amazing. So do you have any characters that you don't like? Because I actually have a few personally.
Okay, the only character that I really did not care for, like, ever is Yabusawa, because her joke is just that she is the butt of a joke for being, like, sometimes for just being fat or, like, stupid, and then
or
also she says, oh, awful, like, yabai, because her name's Yabai-sawa, so that's the joke.
Yeah, she's a very one-note character.
Yes.
Probably the most one-note out of the series aside from, I want to say, Jason.
Jason at least has more to his stories. Like, Yabusawa is like, just, is a character that appears a lot because she is so one-note that it's so easy to make a joke with her.
Yeah.
But, like, Jason will actually at least have chapters to him and has like his own, like, recurring subplot that they do with him. Like, he's trying to find, like, a marriage partner, but he just scares them off because, like, he's the scary guy, So at least, like, there's more they can do with his character than they can do with Yabusawa.
That's true, but, like, I'm so conflicted because, like, I love the concept of Jason, because he's the woodshop teacher, and that's the joke. That's the joke, is that he looks like Jason Voorhees and is always constantly carrying a chainsaw. But like, I don't know. So I guess I like the concept of the character more than I like it, because like, one or two chapters I think he could be funny, but like, I don't know. I got kind of tired of his subplot kind of quickly, but that's just me personally.
Yeah, that may not be one of my favorite characters, but I guess
he's not a bad one.
Yeah, he's not one of those characters like I dislike, because there's nothing about the character themselves I dislike, but Yabusawa, it's not like she was really that nice a person ever either, I mean, she's not a bad person, but it's not like she has a whole lot of like redeeming aspects to her character that make her compelling.
Yeah, I feel like Yabusawa, like, she's probably like the real, like, if you really take a look at Sket Dance, if there were any flaws to the series, which there are, I'm not going to say there aren't, but Yamasawa, I feel like, is definitely a blemish on the series just because she's there to be the butt of the joke and nothing else, and that's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah.
But thankfully she's not around super often, so you don't have to deal with her too often. But I guess speaking of flaws, so I feel like it's important to talk about how as funny as we think Sket Dance can be, the comedy in Sket Dance is very hit or miss, and I feel like that's also another reason why people have such a hard time getting into the series, because not every chapter is funny.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some people definitely say that they couldn't get into the humor of the series. I recently watched DigiBro's review of Astro Lost in Space, and he is not a fan of Shinohara's comedy.
Which is totally fair. I did just recently watch that video, and we'll talk more about Astro Lost in Space next episode, definitely. But he brings up how Astro Lost in Space in particular is very dialogue heavy, which is also the same for Sket Dance. That's
probably one of the main criticisms I'd agree with, is that there is a lot of dialogue, and sometimes there's so much, and it's just really hard to read because it's so text dense. And this is especially a problem I had with Yamanobe chapters when he's explaining the game, because there's just so much explaining of what the game is, and it gets complicated at times, and it just loses me for a while until they get to seeing how they play the game, which is then funny, but the explanation of the games in particular is just really long. And there are also other really long dialogue scenes that stretch on that are supposed to be funny in part because they are so long, and those don't always click with me. And I feel with this with Gintama at times too, is that because it is so wordy at points, it's funnier to hear it said in the anime than it is to necessarily read it, because you kind of absorb it better when you hear someone performing this dialogue than trying to read it yourself.
Yeah, Gintama definitely has that problem in the beginning of its run, at least for the first, I want to say probably 3 years of serialization. At least that's as far as I've read, I think. I'm sure. I mean, obviously nowadays Sriracha is so much better at not just using text all the time to convey the story or the characters, but definitely when he first started, man, sometimes it is hard to get through a chapter of Gintama because there's just so much to read. And I feel like I did have that problem with Sket Dance as well, because, obviously I reread this entire thing so I could talk about it today, and there were definitely some chapters, in my attempt to try to get through the series as fast as I could, there were just some chapters where I kind of skimmed through and just kind of skipped because I could tell which chapters were either not important or weren't really worth revisiting, because there are just, like I said, there are just some chapters that not everyone's going to find funny, and Sket Dance for a while. I mean, I forget where I heard this, so I wish I could source this better, but I remember hearing that it was because of how hit and miss Sket Dance was with its comedy that it was on the verge of cancellation for a while, and basically Switch's first backstory arc was basically the thing that saved it. So, and that didn't come in for until about a year into Sket Dance, a year into its run and jump. So
yeah.
But as hit and miss as Sket Dance can be, I still feel like it has a lot going for it. Thankfully, because it can still be funny, and thankfully, the characters and the emotional catharsis of a lot of different points in the story, I feel really save it from those flaws.
I agree. I mean, what keeps me coming back to Sket Dance and what keeps me thinking about it is the characters and their stories and their development. And I think that's the driving force of what keeps you reading Sket Dance, and also what keeps the characters funny, or what gives you that attachment to want to see what adventures they get up to. I think definitely if there wasn't that grounding, that emotional core of Sket Dance, a lot of the more silly or out there comedy chapters wouldn't have as much effect as they do because the characters are so well defined.
Yeah, the characters really are I think the draw for Sket Dance for me personally.
I think Shinohara does a great job of making all his characters be more than their archetypes. Yabasawa aside, I think every character, they're introduced with, like, maybe their gimmick at the beginning, but you learn more about them as the story goes on. And they either change out of what they were initially, or, like, they have more layers to who they are outside of, like, one thing. I think Saya is a great example of Shinohara taking a character archetype and really playing with it to develop a really interesting character, because Saya's thing is she introduced as that she's a tsundere. She's self-aware of being a tsundere, and she's going to the Sket Dance to ask for their help in growing out of that, and over the course of many chapters, she does. She grows out of being a tsundere, and she even works up the courage to confess to Basun pretty early on in the series' run, and then also gets over her feelings when she's, like, kind of not necessarily rejected, but, like, let down gently. And so she has a great character arc. Like, she definitely transforms from who she was at the beginning of her story to where she is at the end. And that's what I can say about a lot of the other characters as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna get flack from somebody for saying this, but I honestly do believe that Saya is probably the one tsundere character I've ever actually liked. Sans maybe, like, and I mean, I haven't finished the series yet, but from what I've seen of, like, Toradora, I think Taiga is really the only other tsundere character I've ever actually been interested in, like a character of that archetype that I actually enjoy. Yeah, I think Shinohara like you said, does a really great job of playing with that archetype and actually making her more than just an archetype. Like, she still feels like a person.
Yeah.
She feels like a person trying to get over whatever social disorders that she is.
I mean, her thing is really she has a hard time being honest about her feelings, so she reacts to people in this very, like, dismissive kind of standoffish way. So they put the term tsundere in there as, like, this meta reference to, like, the anime archetype, but, like, really in story she's trying to get over, like, an actual, like, social disorder you can believe, like, someone might have, and, like, being that kind of standoffish because they're insecure about saying their mind or, like, admitting their feelings. So it works really well, and she does develop out of it, and I think that speaks to the strength of Shinohara's character writing.
And that's another thing too with her confessing her feelings to Basun, is that, like, she does it and that's it. Like, there's no real, like, drama afterwards. Like,
well, after she does it, like, there's still, she still has feelings for him, so there's still, like, misunderstandings with, her Agata and stuff. Like, cause she confesses before.
All I meant was that, what I was trying to say was she feels fulfilled in a way now that she has actually confessed her feelings to Basun.
Yeah, the characters are aware, like, Basun is aware of, like, her feelings because she confessed. So, they ultimately, he doesn't, he and Saya don't end up getting in a relationship, but, like, the characters aren't, like, in the dark about how they feel towards one another for, like, the entire series. They get it out of the way pretty early on.
She doesn't have that weight on her shoulders anymore. She doesn't feel that pressure to try and, like, talk to Basun a certain way or try to make a move on him or whatever.
Yeah. So there aren't, like, those kind of hijinks that happen.
Yeah, which I really appreciate.
Basun and Himiko have trouble admitting their feelings towards each other. I mean, Himiko in particular, but it's not like they aren't self-aware of them. I think Basun is pretty aware of, like, how Himiko feels, but he's not, like, ready to, like, reciprocate. So, like, that's kind of how I, like, read, like, he also might just be a little oblivious, but I kind of feel like definitely in that, like, arc when they were having the conversation about, Saya's feelings, and then also Himiko asked Basun what he thinks of her, like, he does think about it. Like, he's not completely oblivious to, like, how Himiko feels about it.
I personally feel like he just doesn't fully understand, like, how he feels about Himiko sometimes. Like, the moment that really stands out to me is during the Trouble Travel arc, where they go to Okinawa and they end up having to deal with the Yakuza, and they're all eventually kidnapped and assaulted or whatnot, and Basun has to go rescue Himiko, which is really awesome, by the way. I I remember when that chapter had just premiered in Jump, and I saw raws of it floating around online. I'm like, man, I hope we get to that soon in the anime, and then that never happened. But there's a great moment where Himiko hugs Basun, and Basun's about to hug her back, and then he like kind of hesitates, like he has to like think about it. Like I've never really known how to like read that scene, so that scene has always been very interesting to me.
Yeah. I definitely don't think Basun's aromantic. I definitely think he's just having problems, like, understanding what it means to, like, love another person romantically.
Yeah, so I've always thought that side of it was kind of interesting. Because it's not presented as very straightforward. Like, he doesn't understand those types of feelings.
Yeah. I feel the only other characters that weren't addressing are the Pocket Dan. Tact, Silk, and Smile, they get introduced late into the series run, and they're like a counter group to Sket Dan at the beginning. Like, they're trying to replace Sket Dan because they can do it better, because they're smarter and more efficient, but eventually they realize that they're still lacking because, like, the Sket Dan has more, like, it takes more time to understand what someone else's problem is, and like goes farther in terms of like empathy and like trying than they do. So they learn that they have a lot to learn from Sket Dance, even though like in terms of skills they might be better. At least Tact thinks he's way smarter. And eventually they get humbled. Tact, in particular, gets humbled a bit and eventually decide to become the new Sket Dan after, the current Sket Dan graduates. So that was decent arc for them. They're not, aside from Tact, I guess Silk and Smile don't really have much to them. Smile in particular. I mean, Silk, it was really funny when Basun learned magic from her. That was a good funny chapter. And then afterwards they call her Master or something. So that was kind of fun. But they're just worth addressing because they are major characters that thematically are relevant to the series' theme of helping other people and passing on the torch. You help someone and then they help someone. So they're good in that respect.
I guess, are there any other one-off chapters or arcs we really want to highlight, or do we just want to get into the final arc?
As far as a one-off funny chapter that I really liked is they do this parody fantasy world chapter in the middle of the series where they go, all the characters get these really useless and lame powers to go on this Dragon Quest-esque journey and whatever.
Yeah.
And the chapter ends on an anticlimax where they don't resolve them defeating the Demon King or whatever. They just set off on their journey by the time the chapter ends after, trying to figure out who will get what power and, who gets the better power because there's so many useless powers. And, Basun becomes a slime. And so, it takes, 2 years of serialization, but then they finally do a sequel chapter to that, and it just, explores, how everyone has gotten used to their powers and leveled up, but Basun, because he's a slime, he was, a weak link, so they kind of kicked him out, and so Basun decided to get, revenge, and he became, he's trained himself up to be the best slime and become super strong as a slime. And then, he rejoins the group and he's gonna mess them up. But then he's oh yeah, we knew that you would become super strong if we left you on your own. And then he's oh, and then they all rejoin again to go fight the Demon King. We still don't get a resolution to that, but just find that entire chapter where Basun has to become the strongest slime really funny. It's the premise of this light novel series, reincarnation as a slime, done years before and in one chapter.
Well, as long as we're talking about AU chapters or whatever, I really like the one where they're all ninjas, mostly because Switch just has a computer made out of wood and they call him out on it, and it's the most amazing thing. And also they have to save Roman, who's a princess or whatever. And there's a great moment where they all look to the sky and they see Roman's image in the sky, and Roman is oh hey, I can get out of here through here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I like that one a lot. The AU chapters that Shinohara does are usually, they're fun.
Mm-hmm.
And those are usually good for a laugh or two. What was it? I mentioned the Christmas card arc. That's one of my favorites. I like reading that one around Christmas time because it's just such a nice emotional story. Oh, you know what? We haven't talked about Yuki at all.
Oh, the occult girl. Yeah, she has a good rivalry with Switch, and there's some sweet moments. Like, very early on, there's this chapter where, like, she cleans herself up to look kind of pretty, like, just to prove this point to some guy who, like, was dissing on her. And then Switch has this great conversation where Yuki's like, I'm so weird. But Switch is like, if you're weird, then I'm, like, very weird or whatever. So, like, he's trying to, like, give her, his confidence to be, like, content with who she is because she's, like, a cool person still.
Yeah, kind of make her feel better about herself.
And they have a good rivalry because, Switch believes in science, Yuki believes in the occult, so they butt heads a lot. And those chapters are really fun. But they're also, like, they end up hanging out with each other a lot, too. Even though Switch, like, says, I hate this girl so much. Even in his final speech, he's like, he calls her out as someone who he's not friends with. Or, like, he doesn't like hanging around. Which is really, really funny.
Maybe Switch is the actual tsundere all along.
Yeah, at least around her, he is.
Yeah, so yeah, I like chapters with the both of them too, because they mostly switch, but they do end up going out of their way to try to help each other out every once in a while.
Yeah.
So they're pretty much frenemies, and it's kind of cute.
Mm-hmm.
Man, what else? The Tsukomi band chapter was really good. I like the one with the really macho 80s manga style character that comes in. That was kind of fun.
My favorite Roman chapter is probably the one where she has that manga battle with the shonen guy. And, like, he draws, like, this super typical, like, hot-blooded shonen manga. And then she draws this super weird thing. And she wins because, even though her manga was incomprehensible, like, it was the most interesting thing to read. And so that was, like, a fun chapter.
I like chapters that kind of end in a dumb punchline, like the Detective Club guy, where it's the Sket Dance and they're following this one chick, and then the detective. There's this guy from the Detective Club who like is really into like cop dramas and stuff, and tries to help them, but like he constantly gets in the way, and it turns out that like it's just like this pattern of like everybody trying to follow each other. that the punchline for that's really good. I like the one where Bosun and Switch they take a bunch of pictures of like the sports festival that happened while Himiko was sick, and they just show her what happened with a bunch of pictures, and that gets really weird because like Mario and Luigi are involved for some reason, and everybody makes like these human pyramids, and they all get like lifted off into the heavens. And a lot of really weird shit happens in that one. So that one's pretty funny too. I forgot one of my other favorite ones that ends in a that kind of ends in like a color page is the one where Captain has a fight with her friend over like fruit drops. That one was kind of good because I especially really liked because like I said, that chapter ends in a color page of like of the Sket Dance letting go all these balloons and whatnot, which I forget exactly why, but it's supposed to be like a sentimental kind of thing. So that one's kind of nice.
That was a great use of color pages. Like, a lot of the times when a series gets the color pages, they'll use it to make like this spread or whatever that doesn't have to do with the chapter, but it's just a really cool image. But I liked how Shinohara incorporated his color pages into the plot of that chapter. And like, it ended up making like this huge emotional impact. That was just really, really good use of them.
Yeah, that was really good. I wasn't expecting that first time I read that. But I guess let's talk about the final arc.
So, in the final arc, like, the Sket Dance has basically handed over the reins to the Pakudan to take over. And they're all just preparing for their final, like, school festival and graduation. But a new chairman of the school comes in to replace the old one because he was, like, in failing health or whatever. So he had to step down. So his son comes in to take over. And he's like, okay, this school is too lax. It needs to be stricter. You need to be more focused on education. We're going to separate girls and boys. We're going to make sure that in break time, you only prepare for the next class. Like, he basically restricts everyone's freedom to do things, and it's all in the name of curbing individuality and preventing people from, like, standing out, so that they can only focus on their studies and nothing else. And so the Sket Dance... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I feel like that's a very, like, I don't know if this is, like, a hot take, but I feel like that's a very old, like, Japanese mindset, like, you know?
Yeah.
Cause usually, you know, most people, like, especially, like, in high schools and stuff, like, the reason they have clubs is that, you know, they kind of encourage people to, like, work with the group and not so much, like, you know, not so much do a lot of things, like, by yourself or whatnot. Like, people being against, like, individualism isn't really, like, a new thing, so I found that kind of interesting. Because obviously, like, the thing with this guy coming into Kaimei and trying to make all these rules is that, like, I think it's worth noting that Kaimei as a school is very, at least from what I've seen in, like, other anime and other manga, and I know people who have, like, taught in other Japanese high schools and stuff that, like, you could tell from, like, little details such as, like, people not wearing, like a typical school uniform, like, because all the characters, like, pretty much wear, like, their own clothes, and they all have their own, like, unique outfits and stuff. Like, that's not like a typical Japanese high school thing, because everybody usually has to wear, like, a required uniform and
I mean,
and all
they
that kind of
kind of
stuff.
all have a base uniform, but some characters choose not to wear the uniform. Like Shinzo, he wears his, like, robes and stuff.
Like, either they do have a uniform or, like, they have some kind of variation on it. So, like, they don't, like, none of the characters all look the same in terms of that, which is cool.
They're allowed to, you know, accessorize and adjust their uniforms to, like, stand out.
Yeah. And so, like, you know, I found that kind of interesting that we basically have, like, kind of the typical mindset invading a campus life here at the school. I thought was kind of interesting. Also, like, nuances, like, you know, because he goes on about, like, how he's going to change the school, but it's not until, like, the very end that, like, he decides to, like, you know, introduce himself by name. Like, that's an afterthought with him.
Yeah, like, he's focused on, like, doing the job first and then, like, pleasantries later. So he has a very different approach. He's not a friendly guy. He's like, okay, you are paying the school to learn, so if you want to come here, you better get the most out of it, and so there's no time for frivolities or wasting time. It's time to be efficient and produce, like, good students who will become good workers. And so that's his, like, objective.
Good test scores and all that. Yeah, like being a friendly, like, person and actually getting to know any of his students. Like I feel like that little, like, touch is very telling of his character.
Yeah. Anyway, his goal of stamping out individuality is, like, a great, like, final obstacle for the series, because that's, like, counter to what the series is about. Like, the series is about, like, embracing your individual strengths and using them to help others around you. So that's what Basun is trying to argue, is that everyone's individual strengths can come together and produce something really great. And so what he does is that he decides to use the school festival to put on this event that will show off how everyone's individual strengths can produce something that they couldn't do if alone. Like, how people come together can create some really great things because they all have different ideas and different strengths. And so the guy, like, allows it and says, okay, you can prove this to me. If you fail, you're fired. Basically, you're gonna get expelled. I like how he puts it in those terms. It shows, like, his priorities. He's running this like a business. Yeah, so eventually, I forget what the term for the event that they eventually figure out to do is. But what it is like, it's basically this interactive event where they can take, you know, where people can, like, pair up and, like, do all these, like, quests in this, like, scenario. So it's, like, this really cool, elaborate story, and, like, every, like, main member of the class that they're all in is 3E, I think, is what is their final year class. So every member of that class gets to, like, have a role that plays to, like, who they are, and they all do it really well. And so the goal is to make the new chairman's son speak, because his son refuses to speak because of being bullied in middle school. And that's, like, the motivation for the chairman, is because he thinks that because his son was too much of an individual, he was bullied, so he wants to create an environment where no one will be bullied because everyone will be treated the same and will have to act the same way. And so that's really interesting motivation, because obviously the fact that this kid Yuki will not speak, hits home with Switch. And so Switch tries to they all try to figure out, like, why this kid won't speak. But it turns out not to be as simple as, like, he's afraid of speaking because he was bullied. It turns to be a deeper reason. And the fact that Boston can figure out also really just shines a light of, like, how good his empathetic skills and his ability to understand other people are. And I really applaud the resolution of that. I was, like, anticipating something like this because I saw long back when it was revealed in Astro Lost in Space that Luca was intersex, that you had tweeted, Colton, that Shinohara was really good at depicting and treating transgender or non-binary gendered characters respectfully. So I was waiting to see that in Sket Dance for most of the reading. And so I was, like, very pleasantly surprised with how he handled Yuki, because it turns out the reason Yuki doesn't speak is because Yuki is a transgender boy. And in middle school, he was bullied for being transgender. And what's great about the conversation when this is revealed is that, of course, we get, like, some character explaining, oh, he was really a girl, but, like, both the chairman and Bossoon continue to refer to Yuki as a he, because he is a he. So very respectful treatment of the character's gender there and usage of pronouns. I mean, maybe that's something that was in... it's hard to... because I didn't read the original Japanese, obviously. I don't know what pronouns Shinohara used, but at least I think if the translation is accurate, it was very respectful.
Yeah, and see, that's a thing, too, I really love about this final arc, is that Shinohara, I really do think, is probably, as far as, like, this sort of representation goes, I feel like he is the most respectful out of pretty much anyone, I think, that has worked in Jump, as far as I know. Because, like, usually with this kind of thing in manga, like, whenever you have a non-binary character, it's usually played, not I don't want to say played for laughs, but, like, they're usually a stereotype. Like, even characters we love, like, Bon Clay from One Piece, like, he's a great character, but, he is still sort of a stereotype along with him and, like, Ivankov and Inazuma.
There's, unfortunately, for as great characters as Bon Clay and Ivankov are, there's unfortunately a lot of homophobic elements in One Piece too, with, like, that whole subplot with Sanji on the Kamabaka Kingdom, and that was very unfortunate. And
even going back to, like, Gintama, like, I love Saigo. He's probably one of my favorite minor characters. He's a badass. He literally rips off your genitalia. Like, I don't think you get any more awesome than that. He will actually rip your balls off, and that's great. But unfortunately, like, he's a great character, but unfortunately, a lot of the people that work in his Okama bar are unfortunately subjected to somewhat homophobic humor. Not super often, thankfully, but it is still kind of there. Yeah, but Shinohara treats the situation very respectfully, and is demonstrated through how the characters who really understand Yuki are treating him, like referring to him as a he and as a boy, which is very good. And just the resolution of that in general very much ties into Sket Dance's overall message of it's good to be yourself. You shouldn't be afraid of being yourself or standing out, because you are you and you have a lot to offer the world, and you shouldn't be afraid and you shouldn't wall yourself off from the world, because
there are people out there who are ready to meet and engage with you and befriend you. And so, like, that ultimately opens Yuki's eyes. Like, this experience, like, having fun in this event at the school festival, and, like, he, like, tells his dad that, yeah, I want to go to this Kaime. I want to go into this very inclusive, friendly place.
You know, yeah, like I want to be able to have fun at school. I want to be able to make friends. I want to have that chance. And, yeah. I love that about the final arc where, you know, Shinohara uses all of these like gimmicky, wacky characters as sort of an allegory for accepting yourself and being yourself. And like you said, not being afraid to be yourself with other people, which honestly is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, also one last touch to how Shinohara respectfully handled Yuki's character. When Basun is asking Yuki about his gender, he asks, "You're a boy, aren't you?" He doesn't say, "You were born a girl." He asks, "You are a boy," because that is how Yuki feels. So, again, just very respectful handling of that. That very much impressed me.
Yeah. And obviously, yeah, this Yuki's entire conflict and him trying to break out of his shell pretty much inspires Switch to do the same, which, in my mind, is really like the ultimate ending of Sket Dance. Like, that's kind of, like, I won't say that, like, I don't care about the rest of Sket Dance after that, because the ending, I think, overall is good, even if I'm still kind of like, man, it's a little open-ended. I hope we get, like, an epilogue chapter or something someday, because I feel like we got to see a few characters and what they were doing after they graduate, but I would have loved to see everybody if Shinohara could have helped it.
I was pretty satisfied just with what we got from the main trio, though. Like,
yeah.
The climax of the manga is Switch finally deciding to speak again, and the first thing he says is that, "I'm proud of you guys," and it's so emotional, and they all hug each other, and then they start crying and laughing, and it's just great. And then ultimately Switch is the one to give the graduation speech, and he explains like how important his time there was and how grateful he is for all the friends he made, and it's just such a good speech. So I was very happy with his resolution, and then Boston goes out with like Ryan, who he met in this like one-off chapter about bicycling, which was really funny that Shinohara brought that character back. So he goes off to America to like travel the world doing good with Ryan. And then Himiko becomes a teacher, so it's really good stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, ultimately, I can't say this about too many other manga, because most manga I read, either I don't care for the ending, I don't like it, or it doesn't really stick with me. And Sket Dance's ending, I think, is, for the most part, it's pretty good. Like, again, as much as I would like to see what all the other characters are up to, I'm still very satisfied with the ending. Again, pretty much I don't want to say I'm here for Switch, because that implies like I don't care about anything else, but like I am kind of here for Switch, and that was what I was the most invested in, was when is he gonna speak again? And that was resolved, and as long as that's resolved, I'm pretty much happy with anything Shinohara gives me.
Yeah, Sket Dance was a manga that ended naturally, like the way it wanted to. It had a very well thought out and well paced final arc that like felt right and appropriate as a way to end the series. Yeah. And I was pretty satisfied with where all the main characters ended up with in terms of their character arcs. I definitely think it's one of the most satisfying endings I read for a Shonen Jump manga, because like up until the ending there wasn't really a dipping point, and it didn't lose focus. It like stayed on track right up to the end, I felt.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great endings to Shonen Jump manga, but definitely one of the problems a lot of long-running manga just in general have is that the longer they go on, the more they lose focus of where the ending should be, because they go on past where they might have originally intended to end. So by the time they get to the ending, it just doesn't feel right. But Sket Dances felt right. It felt like this was the natural conclusion of the story. There isn't anything missing that we needed to see.
Yeah, ultimately, I'm happy with Sket Dance's ending, and I don't think it could really have a better ending, honestly. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And, yeah, like, I mean, we just spent, like, 2 hours talking about it, but, I mean, there's a reason I have many reasons why I love Sket Dance so much, and the final arc really, like, cements it for me.
Yeah, to be honest, as much as we talked about it, there's just so much more we could get into. Like, we mentioned how great Switch's character arc is, but we have not really spoiled or, like, delved actually deep into all the specifics of it. But I think it is, like, an arc that is best left experiencing for yourself without as much spoilers as possible. Because I was definitely surprised by the switch on arc, like the second Switch backstory arc, because I did not know anything about it, so I think it's worth keeping a lot of that stuff under wraps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I was saying that earlier, like, it's just gonna be 2 hours of me going, yeah, it's good, yeah, it's good, yeah, it's good. But, like, there is a reason why I don't like delving, like you said, I don't like delving into too many specifics, because I want people to experience that for their own. I hate to give away too much about the series, because I really do think the experience, it's really something you have to experience for yourself. And that's why it saddens me so much when sometimes when I talk to people and I'm like, yes, Sket Dance is pretty good, you should check it out. And then they're like, oh, I've tried it. It's not really that funny. Now, Gintama, that's a funny series.
Yeah, it's just important to remember that like, comedy is not all there is to Sket Dance. I think the message behind it, that you should do your best to help people make use of your individual strengths to be the best person you can be and to help the most people you can, and then you should inspire others to do the same. I think that message is what's really compelling about Sket Dance, and the way it explores it through many different characters with many different but relatable and sympathetic and empathetic problems. I think that's really the core draw, what's really the heart of the series, and that is what informs all the humor surrounding it, which is very funny. But I think actually what is the most laudable part of Sket Dance is really its characters and its teams.
Hell, I mean, like, I guess shout out to Bomber, or Kiraban on Twitter, Sakaki, the guy with 15 different names on the internet. I've had him on the show before, good friend of the show. He recently translated in like a radio interview that he found online recently with Shinohara. I forget exactly what it is, but like he's translated like those like radio interviews from that particular program before, like, because he's translated like radio interviews with like Tite Kubo of all people and whatnot on that same show. But this particular show had Shinohara on just recently, interviewing him about him as a manga artist and whatnot. And I could be remembering this wrong, but I think Bomber at some point mentioned how Shinohara talks about how he doesn't consider Sket Dance a gag manga, which I think is really interesting, because like Sorachi kind of has that same mindset about Gintama. Like, he doesn't consider it a gag manga. Sorachi, in his own words, considers Gintama in particular a nonsense manga, just something he can just kind of do whatever he wants with, and that's totally true. And it's so interesting to see these series that, like, again, like we keep mentioning, like, people just think they're just always comedy and nothing else. They have nothing else to offer, when the people that are behind these works have said themselves, like, no, I don't really think of this thing as a comedy manga. That's not really how I think about it. Like, it's just really interesting to see that contrast between the fans and the people behind these works.
I do think of Sket Dance as a comedy, but I take issue when people refer to series like Sket Dance and Gintama as gag manga, because gag series are series that are like focused on the moment to moment like joke. And there's like no real, it's like the ultimate like kind of postmodern form of comedy, because there's like no grounding for what the comedy is. It's just what you could say pure randomness or referentiality. But there is grounding for the humor in Sket Dance for a lot of it, because it's informed by the characters and the situations they are in. And it's not like non sequitur like gags that come out of nowhere.
Like, what I guess really, like, gag manga would be stuff like Isube, Monogatari, what we just talked about recently on Manga Mavericks, Lycopene, the Tomatoy Poodle, like, Inomari Dashi, or whatever that thing's called. Just stuff like that are actual gag manga, like somewhat. I don't want to say disposable. That's not the right word, but I guess like you said, very moment to moment, like kind of joke gag machines, like
Yeah.
stuff like The Simpsons or Family Guy or whatnot, that are kind of like those. But yeah, Gintama and Sket Dance, obviously, they deal mostly in comedy, but there's continuity between both series, and Shinohara and Sorachi go out of the way to really develop these characters and really make them feel like real people that you can kind of get behind and empathize with.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the biggest difference between these series and actual gag manga.
Mm-hmm. I would wholeheartedly agree.
I guess, is there anything else we really want to talk about?
Man, there is so much that we've talked about already, but like you said, we could probably go on for way longer because there is just a lot. But I feel like, I have this top 10 story arc list or chapter list that I would want to read off, but I feel like we kind of already touched the points for everything I would say. But I guess just to say what those stories are. I think at number 10, the Village Battle story arc was an early favorite of mine because that was a really good use of both the Sket Dance and Student Council's rivalry, and there were just a lot of good moments. In particular, I actually really liked Shinzo's battle with Tsubaki and him overcoming his weakness to use Frisk to fight. And he's down to only they're fighting in this kendo battle, and they have to hit these balls on each other's armors, and so because Shinzo runs out of his Frisk, he loses focus, and Tsubaki gets him down to one ball, but at the last second Shinzo wills himself to focus and he wins. So that was an early favorite arc, but that moment in particular stood out to me, and that was why I really liked Shinzo a lot, and why I was disappointed that he kind of gets phased out in the middle of the manga.
The interesting thing about that arc is that arc is so close to near the year serialization point within the series that I couldn't help but while I was reading it thinking if Sket Dance were to end after this arc, this would be a decent end to a canceled manga from Jump.
Yeah, I would agree, especially since the impetus for that battle was the manga that Shinohara stand-in made about the student council, and then getting frustrated over that. That was kind of funny. And then, so at number 9, I really liked the chapter called Last Day of the President, which is where, the student council devises this, very complex series of riddles for Agata to solve. He thinking that his sister has been kidnapped, and he's trying to solve riddles left by kidnappers, but ultimately it's a message from the student council, saying thank you and good luck and stuff. And it was a really sweet moment, and just also a good use of that character. So I really like that.
Ignoring the fact that they made this guy think that his sister was kidnapped, was probably in danger, yes, I guess this is a sweet moment.
It is a sweet moment. I mean,
it is, but I'm just imagining things from on the other side. This dude is really actually worried about his sister. If I were in his situation, I would appreciate it, but I would also be guys, you didn't have to go this far. I actually thought I actually thought my sister was killed. What are you guys doing?
At number 8, I have the Ogress arc, which is Himiko's backstory. And because I do find all the backstories compelling, and Himiko is learning who she was before, and how she got kind of betrayed by her friend and lost trust in making new friends and just became a loner delinquent. But then she ultimately opens up to Basun and Takahashi and then joins Sket Dance. I just thought it was a good story overall, and I really liked it a lot. And at number 7, we have the follow-up to that, the Travel Trouble arc, because I have to say, that is a really brutal arc. That is one of the arcs where you feel the Sket Dance is most in danger, because they're going up the Yakuza, and they get brutalized in that arc. They get beat up real bad. And you definitely fear for them, for the situation they're in, because they're going up against bad guys and they are hurting them. And so there's just really great moments from Himiko in that, when she's going after this guy who's like harassing her friend, but then she gets kidnapped and Boston and Switch have to rescue her, and it's quite the ordeal, but it has a great resolution where Himiko like reveals like she is the Onihime to her friend at the end, and like she doesn't, and her friend is like doesn't mind because Himiko's her friend, and like it points out how Himiko has built up like this great circle of friends, like where she is at Kaime now, and so it's like a great character development arc for her. And then we have at number 6, Happy to Meet You, which is a chapter where Basun invites Tsubaki home for dinner, and like they're really uncomfortable, trying to get used to the idea that they're brothers, but it's like really sweet how they try. And at the end, they like take a picture together, to like celebrate the memory of like their parents, because they could never like take a picture together as a family before. So it was really, really sweet and emotional chapter.
I think Tsubaki also watches like his deceased parents' home movies in that same chapter, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's another like emotional moment. Like that's the first time Tsubaki sees those movies of his parents. So that's really, really sweet.
Yeah.
At number 5, I have the Switch Off, the first Switch backstory, because again, like that revelation of like who Switch is and like why he's the way he is just so shocking, because it fools you at the start into thinking that Switch was someone else at the beginning of that backstory. But then as the story goes on, you reveal who Switch really is, and then like how he came to dress the way he is and why he's speaking the way he does through the computer. It's just like,
yeah. Switch is like goofy, like kind of otaku, like talking to a computer. His whole like gimmicky personality is basically a lie.
And it's like bittersweet because at the end, Switch's like childhood friend that he was in love with kind of like moves away, and we never like see a resolution to that. Like that's just a connection that is gone at the end, and it's like we know from the later arc that like it does not get good for Switch until he meets Basun again. So it's like really depressing the way it leaves off. But it's a kind of a shame that we never see that girl again. But at the same time, I kind of like that, because I kind of like that not all the connections in their past get neatly resolved. Like they do have to move on.
It's okay because he has Momoka now.
Yeah, that's really great. I left this off. I ended up taking this off the list, but that's another moment I was considering. Like the moment where like Momoka kind of confesses to Switch, but like Switch turns her down because he just claims to be a fan and not romantically interested in her. And then Momoka kind of goes up on stage and like kind of calls Switch out for not being honest about his feelings, and it sings like this really relevant and heartfelt song that kind of relates to the situation. Like I really like the subplot with Switch and Momoka kind of becoming involved, even though Switch refuses to let himself love again because he doesn't think he deserves to, until like the very end. And it's just, yeah, there's great resolution for that. I do like how they get together at the end. I was very happy that it did work out like that. We didn't talk about her much at all, actually, but Momoka is also a very interesting character, because she's introduced as as a delinquent much like Himiko, and she's actually impersonating Himiko as the Onihime and unknowingly kidnaps Himiko, who's the real Onihime. And then eventually when the truth is revealed, like she kind of just becomes Himiko's best, not like she becomes very reverent of Himiko and like starts hanging around her a bunch. And eventually like she gets noticed for her great, acting abilities and singing voice when they put on the puppet show. And so she becomes a seiyuu. And then she gets a bunch of career changes until eventually becomes a singer. So she has like a really radical change in terms of like who she was at the start of the series and then who she becomes too, which kind of just shows like there's like everyone has their own strengths, that it just takes being recognized and appreciated by someone to get put on the path to reach your full potential and like make the most out of your abilities to like help and bring happiness to other people's lives. So I really like that aspect of her character arc a lot, and she has a great relationship with both Switch and Himiko.
Yeah, I think I only didn't mention her because of her career, she's not like around at school much, or at least she's not on screen a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean she appears a lot during the first year of serialization, and then appearances get more sporadic because, she's a full-time singer, but when we do see her, her chapters are meaningful because they're relevant to either Switch or Himiko's character development. And so at number 4, I have the final arc, Last Dance, which we talked about a lot, but yeah,
it's not number 1, Sid. I'm so disappointed.
That's because the top 3 arcs, really hit me. And, I just read this last arc yesterday at the time of this recording. Yeah. So, at number 3, we have the Happy Birthday and Happy Rebirthday story arc, which is Basun's backstory, learning about him, how he found out about what happened to his parents, and, his kind of, lashing out towards his adopted mother when he realizes that she's not his biological mother, but then coming around and apologizing because she is his mother because she raised him and loved him like her own son. It's really sweet. And then of course it leads into, when we flashback in the present, Basun learning that Tsubaki is his brother, and, them kind of coming to terms with that and forgiving, their adoptive parents for keeping them in the dark about this secret, and then just moving on because they love their families. But also, decided to make an effort to treat each other as family, even though it's, so weird that they realized they had this connection that they never knew they had before. So that was just I really knew the least about Basun's backstory before I started reading Sket Dance. So this really hit me hard because I was most surprised for this. And I also really does inform a lot about what's great about Basun's character and why he decided to be the way he is. And also I just am really drawn to stories about family as well, and learning to come together as family. So so stories about that always hit me. And fun fact about Basun, his birthday, he was born on November 11th, which is the same as my birthday. So I feel a particular connection to Basun because of that. Although he was born in 1992, so he's 3 years older than me, technically.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't like that Basun is a year older than me. I don't, that doesn't feel right for me for some reason.
Yeah. And then at number 2, we have the school trip Rhapsody arc, which I just think is one of the funniest arcs. I love all the things they do with the body switching between Basun and Himiko, and also Tsubaki gets hypnotized into thinking he's a cat, which is also super funny during that arc. And then there's also just great character development, in terms of Saya confessing, and then Himiko and Basun having that conversation about how they feel about each other. I think that was just a great mix of comedy and character development, so it really stood out to me, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And then at number 1, we have Switch On, Switch's second backstory, which explains how Switch joined Sket Dance, and that's a really involved story, and it's actually really, really cool. Again, there's another big twist about Switch in this chapter that you don't really expect at the start, but then as it goes on, it's hits you and you're oh crap, so Switch was really doing this all this time. And then when it concludes with Basun breaking into Switch's window to drag him out and and get him to come out of his room, and they fight each other in the room until they ultimately notice some thief outside who steals something, and so they team up to stop this guy. And then afterwards they make up, and Basun invites Switch to join the Sket Dance. So that was just a really great story as well. I think that's the strongest story in the manga, because it's the culmination of that mystery behind Switch. And his development, of course, is resolved in the final arc, but that revelation about how he joins Sket Dance is, just really incredible. And if the first Switch backstory contextualized what he did in a new light that you can't go back and revisit without thinking about, this one all does that even doubly so, because of what other things Switch is feeling guilty to what, and why he's truly indebted for Basun for saving him. So yeah, those are my top 10 favorite storylines in the series.
Yeah, a lot of those are pretty much my favorite too, so I think we're mostly in agreement.
But yeah, we've been talking for a long time. should we wrap up, or is there any final things we have to say?
We do have some stuff from our
that's
from
right.
our listeners.
We have an email from Allison. She writes, "Hello, Manga Mavericks. It's me out 900 here. I heard of Sket Dance because when I was binging Gintama, there was an episode where the characters of Sket Dance crossed over into it. I watched the anime on Crunchyroll and read the manga afterwards. Sucks how it isn't in English legally. My favorite character in the series is Basun. He's a fun dude. My favorite arc in Sket Dance is the arc where Switch's character story gets concluded. I was always fascinated by him because he was the most mysterious character. I forget what the arc is called because it's been a few years since the last read Sket Dance. The arc is called Switch On, which is my favorite arc."
I know. I kept getting those confused earlier too.
Yeah. She concludes by saying, "I like the series overall. It's a good comedy series that isn't too pun-heavy like Osamatsu and Gintama. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this manga and anime." Thank you, Allison. I'm not sure that Sket Dance is less pun-heavy than Osamatsu and Gintama, but as we talked about before, there is a lot of different humor in the series compared to those series.
I was going to say, I don't think Sket Dance is completely clean of any puns or whatever.
I mean, there's plenty of puns. Yabasawa's name is a pun, for heaven's sake.
But anyway, yeah. Yeah, hopefully Sket Dance can, be licensed one day. That'd be great. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I am sending in my 7 C's surveys because I don't know if Viz will ever actually pick it up, so...
I mean, there are some people in the corner to support Sket Dance getting licensed at Wiz, but of course, because it's such a long series, it's still a tough sell, even if Astra, does extremely well, which, that's another reason why you should really support the releases of Astra Lost in Space, because if that does really well, we might get more Shinohara manga, especially Sket Dance.
Yeah, really just support whatever you can of Shinohara's works. I'm kind of surprised that any of his works have been licensed in English at all, honestly. But thank you, Allison, for sending that email. And I think we're going to move on to Twitter here. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow us at manga_Mavericks. And our first response comes from Doctor at SSAA Podcast, who says, "Obligatory Diet Gintama response here," which... Thank you, Doctor, for that very insightful commentary on Sket Dance as a series as a whole.
But we have another comment here from Joel Dreyer, who says, "Sket Dance has some amazingly emotional, cathartic moments. Switch's entire character arc is just great. It's also got some running gags that can be very funny. I love Dante, don't add me." Dante is a character we did not talk about at all.
No, we didn't.
He's basically this guy who talks in this visual K speak. At least his image is that of a visual K group, and he talks in a bunch of jargony catchphrases. So there's a bunch of trouble trying to understand what he's really saying because he's talking so weirdly. Not one of my favorite characters, admittedly, but he can be funny.
Yeah, his chapters could be fun, so...
Joel also writes, "Other jokes that last the entire manga are terrible. He always skips Roma chapters."
I completely disagree with that.
Yeah, Roman's one of my favorite characters. Sorry, Joel. But he concludes by saying, "I will say Sket Dance has some pretty excellent highs and a lot of middle ground that I don't think about until I'm actually rereading and start thinking, how many chapters were actually funny again?"
I mean... That might be a little harsh, but I also, again, this just goes back to when we were talking about Sket Dance's comedy. It's not every chapter is going to be a gut-busting roller coaster ride. Some chapters I don't necessarily think are always funny, but I guess for instance, the one where they find the time-traveling electric fan, while it's kind of weird and kind of amusing, I didn't think was it's not necessarily one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of one that I really didn't think was funny, though. Mostly because I probably just forgot it. But yeah, I kind of agree with Joel a little bit, at the very least.
Yeah, every long-running comedy will have those couple of chapters or episodes where you don't really think about a whole lot until you're rewatching it. You tend to only remember the most important and most memorable stuff. But I think what you're saying there, Joel, about Sket Dance having excellent highs, is very important because Sket Dance's highs are so good that They define the series.
And they're so worth it too.
Yeah. So even if you have to enjoy like a random chapter that doesn't seem to have much to do with the overarching character development stuff, like, it's still worth reading them because oftentimes they are funny, and just the entire journey of reading Sket Dance, by the end you love all the characters because you spent so much time getting to know them.
But I think that's about it for our comments, right? Did we get anything on Animation Revelation at all?
No, we did not.
All right, just making sure. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your comments. And, yeah, remember, if you ever send us an email over at mangamavericks@gmail.com or leave us a tweet at manga_mavericks, we will definitely read them on the show.
Mm-hmm. We love getting your emails, guys, so please send them to us.
But I think that's gonna be about it for the show. I think we had a pretty good discussion of Sket Dance, finally.
Yeah, I'm glad we were finally able to do this discussion. We put this off for quite a few months, and I'm sad that we weren't able to do this back in September when I had finished reading it, like, just right then. Because then there would be a lot more that we could have talked about that would have been fresher in my mind, but still already, just a few months removed, there's just so much that came back to me while discussing, and then so much I have been thinking about that I was really happy to finally be able to talk about. I really, really enjoyed reading Sket Dance. This is definitely one of my favorite manga that I've gotten the chance to read on the show. I definitely think I could include it among my favorite manga because of just how incredible the character writing is and how much I connected with those characters and how much I connected with the themes that Shinohara was exploring. Is really, really great.
Yeah, so look forward to our next episode where we talk about Kenta Shinohara's just recently finished work that you can read mostly for free legally on Viz.com, Astra Lost in Space.
That's right. And if you want to get caught up on that before you listen to that podcast, you can do that because it's a pretty short series as well. So definitely head over to Viz.com and go to the Shonen Jump free section to read up on Astra Lost in Space. It's an incredible series that deserves more attention, and I can't wait to talk about it next week. I am really, really excited about Kenta Shinohara's stuff, and I'm glad we're doing these two episodes back to back to talk about both of his major series.
Yeah, I can't wait to finish it because I still haven't finished it yet.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to look forward to your fresh thoughts on that when we do it next episode.
Yes. So hopefully we can maybe get a guest on that. I would like it. I would like us to, because we know one or two people who really are very into Astra, I would say, and I'd like to get at least one of them on, maybe, if we could help it.
Yes, hopefully.
But I guess until then, I guess, Sid, where can the good people find you?
You guys can find me on Twitter at LumRanmaYasha and basically anywhere under the username LumRanmaYasha. On Twitter, I'm currently doing read-throughs of Urusei Yatsura, one tweet per chapter daily read of that. There's 366 chapters of Urusei Yatsura, so that's a year-long project, and I'm having a lot of fun revisiting the manga in honor of its 40th anniversary this year. I'm also concurrently doing a rewatch on the anime. I have a Twitter for that on Twitter, and yeah, I'm also participating in the Gintama group thing. And I hope to write more stuff for allcomic.com, more reviews and such, but as I explained in my in the Black Clover anime podcast and the introduction for that, I am extremely busy right now with school stuff, so a lot of the side projects that I was doing, like the Manga Mavericks Act movies and all the side podcasts, they're probably going to be on a hiatus for a couple of months until I can clear up all of this school stuff and get it out of the way. So, but you can get updates for whatever I'm doing by just following me on Twitter at LumRanmaYasha.
Well, there you go. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at SniperKing323. I'm currently reading through Astra Lost in Space just in time for us to record about it in the next week or so. I'm reading a bunch of other stuff, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Every once in a while, I try to read a volume of Yu Yu Hakusho. I try to get through some Food Wars. At some point, I'm going to start Princess Jellyfish, like I said in our last episode.
Good.
I read a little bit of Golden Kamui, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I broke. I had to read it. I know Casey would have wanted me to anyway. But yeah, those are just some of the stuff I'm reading. You can follow all my thoughts on those particular series and any other thing, anything else I'm reading over at, again, CyberKing323. I also run Life Lessons, the Gintama Manga Cast. Slowly but surely trying to get through my backlog of episodes that I still haven't edited yet. But I just posted an update about the podcast as a whole on the podcast feed, so go check that out at gintalifelessons.wordpress.com. You can also check out One Podcast Prevails at onepodcastprevails.wordpress.com, where me and my good friend Doctor, otherwise known as SSA Podcast, talk about Detective Conan / Case Closed. We go through the series from the very beginning, and hopefully we can get started on that again pretty soon too. I miss recording that show. So something I want to mention real quick, but I don't think I'm going to mention too often because I want to be a little humble about this, but I just thought it'd be worth mentioning. Me and Sid both have accounts over at Ko-fi.com now. So, Ko-fi, if you don't know, is basically just a website for different content creators where, if you like somebody's work and they have an account, you can drop a little change in our jar. It's like tipping us for all the stuff that you like that we do. What is it? I think it's like $3 minimum or something, maybe less than that.
Yeah.
That you can drop in, just send on over to our account if you really like our work. But, yeah, I think, let's see, mine is at ko-fi.com/Colton.
And mine's ko-fi.com/LumRanmaYasha.
So again, if you like our work and you think, maybe I should give these guys a couple of bucks, then you have the option to do so. And that exists. So there you go. And I guess, moving on to other podcast stuff, you can find more of Manga Mavericks over at all-comic.com. And you can also follow us on facebook.com/all.comic or on twitter.com/allcomic_. But if you want to follow the podcast, Manga Mavericks specifically, you want to follow us on Twitter at manga_Mavericks. Again, leave us a tweet there and we'll read it on the show. And like we said earlier, you can email us anything about, what do you think about Sket Dance? What do you think about, Kenta Shinohara's works? What do you think about Astro Lost in Space? You could send us an email about that in particular, so we can read that on the show, to mangamavericks@gmail.com. You can also follow us on mangamavericks.tumblr.com and also follow us on YouTube at Manga Mavericks. I forget.
Yeah, YouTube/C/Manga Mavericks.
Yep, we actually have a link for that this time, and it's all thanks to you guys.
We have that custom URL thanks to you guys. We got those 100 subscribers. Let's aim for 1,000.
Yes, hopefully we could get to that by the end of the year. Oh, also, we should, I guess we should mention our survey, too.
Yes, please take our year-end survey, fill that out. It's just got a couple questions about our podcast and what you liked the most about it last year. Filling out that survey is really helpful for us to, let us know, who our audience is, what they enjoy most about our podcast, to help us kind of refine the show and keep making better and better podcasts going forward. So we really appreciate if you could fill out that survey. We have it going up throughout this entire month for you to fill out, and the link is in the description of wherever you're listening to this. So please look down there and head over and fill out those questions.
Alright, go ahead and do that. But the most important thing, guys, is that you subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, whatever Apple's calling that thing. Leave us a review and a rating if you so choose to. But yeah, I think that's going to be about it for this episode. Thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Manga Mavericks. This has been episode 41, and we'll see you guys next time for episode 42. Bye, guys.
Sayonara!